Inside the glittering banquet hall, a beautiful princess named Charlotte is still catching her breath after dancing with the Archduke when a familiar chill runs right down her spine. Duke Adler, her cold and very observant fiancé, is standing behind her. He asks if she enjoyed dancing with another man. Charlotte answers honestly, keeping things polite, but he still looks as if this moment has now been officially added to her suspicious activity log. She quietly suggests they step aside so the guests stop staring, but before she can move, he takes her hand and pulls her into a second dance. While they move across the floor, the Duke brings up her past love confession. She had claimed she fell for him at first sight, so he wonders why she was busy dancing with someone else. The princess explains herself, trying to smooth the situation, but he leans in closer. Then, he whispers that he is a bit conservative when it comes to his woman's past. And when he senses another man around her, it makes him want to kill him. A normal person might think he's exaggerating. Charlotte, unfortunately, remembers she's engaged to the man who becomes the prime suspect in her murder. The reminder hits her like cold water. Right, this isn't just jealousy. This is a future crime scene warming up on the dance floor. Her mind snaps back to the moment everything started. The very second she reincarnated, she appeared in front of the Emperor. He was already annoyed back then, and our heroine was still trying to understand where she was when the engagement announcement dropped like a boulder. Princess Charlotte is to marry Duke Irenaeus von Adler, and the wedding, 6 months away. That name hits her like a punch. She remembers it from the introduction page of the novel she had planned to read the day before. Just the intro. She didn't even reach chapter 1 because she literally died of exhaustion after working for 5 days straight. The introduction was short but horrifying. The delinquent Princess Charlotte becomes the 8th victim of a serial killer on her wedding night. The prime suspect is her fiancé, and while investigating the case, a man and a woman fall in love. And now our heroine was stuck right in the center of it as Princess Charlotte. When she first met the Duke, he was polite, composed, and far too handsome for someone whose future file had "suspected murderer" stamped across it. Charlotte didn't even have an opportunity to breathe before the Emperor scolded her again. He brought up everything, from her disrespect to her infamous tantrum during her previous request to marry Archduke Kilian. His warning was final. If she dares to argue with him one more time, she can kiss her princess title goodbye. And judging from his tone, he is not bluffing. Charlotte appears to want to protest, and perhaps explain that she is actually a reincarnated prosecutor trying to survive. But instead, he signals the Chamberlain to escort her and the Duke for a private talk, whether she liked it or not. During her tea, Charlotte notices Duke Adler's behavior is different from how he acted in front of the Emperor. Peeking at the nearby newspaper, she reads the flattering details from an article about him. Asgard Monthly voted Duke Adler as the most desirable man for the 3rd consecutive year. Being wealthy, handsome, and prestigious, Duke Adler embodies the epitome of perfection for the Empire. Everyone wants to know who he will marry, and it turns out that the lucky bride is her, the Empire's delinquent princess. This pairing likely caused at least 5 gossip columnists to faint. And of course, the Duke knows she adored Archduke Kilian, whom the original Charlotte wishes to marry. In fact, the entire Empire was aware of this, treating it as if it were a national holiday. So the Duke bluntly tells her that since it is an arranged marriage, there's no need for them to keep meeting. They can simply see each other again, on the wedding day. In Charlotte's mind, the phrase translates to, "See you on the day you die." This is not the romantic reassurance one hopes for. And honestly, who would believe her if she pointed at this handsome, elegant Duke and declared, "He's a serial killer"? People would probably laugh and think she's gone insane. Thankfully, her former life gave her one huge advantage. She was a prosecutor who worked in an anti-corruption violent crimes department. Murder investigations were practically her daily morning coffee. To survive, she must collect evidence in the next 6 months and uncover the truth behind the serial killer. And the smartest way to do that is to get close to him. Which brings us to her sudden transformation into a woman hopelessly in love. Duke Adler. To tell you the truth, I fell in love with you at first sight, so we should start dating. The Duke is so shocked he literally spills his tea. A rare sight, really. She insists that she wants a love marriage, not an arranged one. Naturally, he is skeptical. Even a random dog on the streets would know that up until this morning, Charlotte was begging the Emperor to allow her to marry the Archduke. The original Charlotte had been desperate because her romantic pursuit of the Archduke Kilian was going nowhere. So now the question becomes, how does she convince him? Easy. She compliments him, his face, his charm, and his reputation. All of it is objectively impressive, and she even brings up and hands him the newspaper that crowned him the empire's top bachelor. Then she pushes further. When the emperor arrives, she openly says she's grateful for the fiancé he chose, and that she wants to go on dates with the duke before the wedding. A smart move. The duke cannot decline without offending royalty. The emperor, blissfully unaware of her survival mission, assumes she finally realized the duke's worth. He looks relieved, as though his troublesome daughter has finally decided to behave. He even asks the duke to take good care of her, which Duke Adler accepts, though his eyes silently ask the universe what just happened. Back in her room, Charlotte is sitting before the mirror, taking in her reflection. For someone dealing with a messy love life, she still couldn't help but admire her new angelic face. Even she had to admit it. At least fate gave her good visuals to work with. But vanity wasn't her priority today. Since she barely knew anything about the story she'd dropped into, learning the basics was non-negotiable. And luckily, the perfect source walked right in, her longtime maid. Martina Hudson had served Princess Charlotte for 4 whole years, quite a feat considering the princess's notorious behavior. After learning her full name, Princess Charlotte von House of the Asgard Empire, from the bowing Martina, Charlotte explained her memory issues, admitting that she remembered nothing before yesterday. At first, she braced herself, wondering if her excuse was too flimsy. But Martina surprisingly accepted it easily, and theorized that Charlotte's days-long hunger strike probably weakened her body enough to cause amnesia. Martina even weeps as she sits on the floor, saying that the royal physician didn't even check on her poor Princess Charlotte. Our heroine believes that the real Charlotte struggled to maintain the same help for long because of her terrible behavior as a delinquent princess. And if Martina had remained by her side despite this, she must have had the patience of a saint. Patting Martina's shoulder, Charlotte says that she wanted to depend on her trustworthy maid a lot, especially for anything that she didn't know. But Charlotte gently asked Martina to keep her secret, worried that a single slip could worsen her already fragile position in the imperial palace. Martina promised loyalty without hesitation, insisting that the princess could rely on her. With Martina's help, she learned more about the original Charlotte. Her mother, once the emperor's beloved mistress, had died giving birth to her. Out of fondness for Charlotte's mother, the emperor had formally acknowledged Charlotte, but his affection ended there. Instead of being a good parent, he threw the title of princess at her and showed no interest while she was growing up. It was only natural for the empress and her children to dislike Charlotte. She was the living reminder of the emperor's affair. And the nobles? They looked down on her in a subtle yet unmistakable manner. Yes, she's a princess in name only. She had no supporters and no followers. The next question was the hunger strike. Martina revealed the reason that Charlotte had starved herself, hoping the emperor would allow her to marry Archduke Kilian of the North. The princess had been hopelessly in love, completely blinded by emotion, despite the fact that the Archduke himself couldn't stand her antics. A love so one-sided it almost hurt to listen. Charlotte could only wonder why the original princess risked her life for a man who barely tolerated her existence. Still, the bigger mystery was Duke Adler. What had he done so bad that he earned the emperor's sudden decision to marry him to Charlotte? That question lingered like a puzzle she desperately needed to crack. To begin her investigation, Charlotte requested newspapers from the last week. Murder cases were serious enough that reports were printed daily, making them the perfect starting point. As soon as she flipped through them, her face stiffened. 4 victims. Already 4. She did the math. According to the novel, she was the 8th victim. Time was sprinting, and she couldn't waste even a single day. She needed evidence, allies, information, anything that would help her get ahead of the killer. And for that, she needed an assistant. A truly exceptional one. And her candidate, a prisoner. While walking inside that creepy prison, Martina couldn't help but ask why her princess was looking for an assistant among prisoners. Charlotte jokes that the idea of a villainess like her recruiting a dangerous criminal had its own amusing charm. Her maid instantly looked like she aged 10 years from hearing her idea. A few minutes later, Martina introduces Charlotte to her older cousin Stanford, who works as a guard at Bart's prison. Stanford then guides the two to a man infamous enough to call himself the vicious dog who bites nobles. Martina is practically vibrating with nerves as she leans and whispers to Charlotte, giving warnings. She knows exactly who Jonathan Watson is, the notorious soldier who once lost his temper and beat up a major, his own superior. Assaulting an officer and a noble in one go? In this empire, that's basically speed-running your way into prison. To Martina, he's the kind of man she should keep 10 feet away from a princess at all times. But Charlotte? She already memorized every line of his case file, shrugged at the danger, and requested a private meeting anyway. At this point, she's so focused on survival that threatening criminal is barely on her list of concerns. Once the two leave them alone, Charlotte gets straight to the point. She tells Jonathan she wants to buy his loyalty. She lays out the offer with the ease of someone ordering lunch. She'll handle his bail, fix his ruined reputation, and give him a fresh life. Jonathan, who expected to be treated like some noblewoman's unofficial toy, stiffens at the assumption, but Charlotte shuts that idea down fast. She has zero interest in that kind of nonsense. Her real intention is entirely different. She wants to investigate a few very serious matters, and she needs an assistant for the next 6 months. And he's not random. She chose him because she already knows he used to be an imperial investigator. Then comes the deal, and honestly, it's shockingly generous. A stable job in the palace, a weekly salary, bail fully covered, and his mother's hospital expenses paid without hesitation. It's the kind of offer that if other inmates overheard this, half the prison might suddenly try to commit minor, polite crimes, just to increase their chances of being recruited. Jonathan eventually stops looking at her like she's insane, and with an offer like that, well, it's not surprising he ends up viewing her as his new master. Soon after, Charlotte heads to the library, and the librarian panics the moment he sees her. The man practically bends in half apologizing, which really shows how terrifying the original Charlotte must have been. She ignores the trembling and politely informs him she'll be visiting often from now on, requesting the books on her list. Then she buries herself in study, absorbing the imperial family tree, history, noble names, and the laws of the empire. For someone who was a prosecutor in her past life, this kind of disciplined studying is second nature. Her goal is simple: to understand the empire inside and out in order to survive. But her new body isn't as sturdy as her previous one. Staying up for days now feels impossible, and she quickly realizes she has to pace herself. The next morning, Jonathan appears looking surprisingly refreshed. She tells him to relax around her, and he returns the suggestion. She gives him his first task: gather every detail related to the serial murders. The differences between each case, the killer's habits, the unique traces at every crime scene. She needs everything, and she tells him to burn the note immediately, just in case. Their discussion is interrupted when a maid announces Charlotte's morning banquet. These meetings are weekly gatherings where the emperor talks politics with his children over breakfast. It's less family meal and more royal job interview, since he uses these moments to evaluate who is fit for the throne. Charlotte almost never joins because she's dead last in the succession line. For her, skipping the banquet used to be a tradition, and now, hearing she must attend today throws her into a brief panic. This wasn't in her schedule. But Martina quickly reminds her that showing up might help her stand out positively to the emperor, and maybe increase her budget. And with Jonathan on payroll now, a little extra wouldn't hurt. So off she goes. She arrives late, which her father immediately points out. She explains the late notice, but Prince Frederick, the Empress's eldest son, snidely claims the maid probably didn't read it to her. Princess Camilla takes the insult and runs with it, saying Charlotte never reads anyway, and maybe doesn't even know how. Truly, the two of them thrive on pettiness, like plants in sunlight. But new Charlotte? Oh, she is not intimidated. She plays along with their insults with casual amusement, which irritates them even more. Frederick even throws in that she must be hearing impaired for good measure. Really, at this point, they're just fishing for reactions she refuses to give. And as expected, the main purpose of the banquet is the announcement of Duke Adler's engagement to Princess Charlotte, something the Empire must soon celebrate. Perfect setup for another round of ridicule. Camilla reminds everyone about Charlotte's infamous hunger strike over Archduke Kilian, which left her as light as a feather. Frederick tops it by claiming she's light because she carries nothing. No dignity, no knowledge, nothing except maybe flowers blooming inside her empty head. Truly creative insults, but Charlotte meets them with a serene smile that says, "You can bark all you want, it won't matter." When she glances at Duke Adler, she notices a full scowl carved on his face. She responds by giving him a little wink, sweet innocent, and just mischievous enough to send him spilling his tea. Someone is rattled, apparently. The conversation shifts to the year's wheat surplus and the plummeting prices. One group suggests burning part of the crops to stabilize the market. Another wants to export the excess. Then someone intentionally brings up Princess Charlotte's opinion since she hasn't shown up in ages. Of course, her siblings jump at the chance to humiliate her again. They're practically vibrating with anticipation. Charlotte would honestly prefer to stay quiet and observe. She has zero interest in the throne, and engaging in royal debates doesn't sound appealing, but their constant mocking is getting old. They wanted a show, and the moment she speaks, they're absolutely going to get a jaw-dropping one. The two groups present offer two ideas to fix the collapsing wheat prices: burn the wheat fields, or freely export the surplus. Charlotte calmly explains that both solutions are disasters waiting to happen. Burning fields would trigger outrage among the commoners. After all, no one appreciates soldiers trampling crops like pests. And exporting? That's even worse. She draws attention to a fact that everyone has conveniently overlooked. Vassal states surround the empire, rebelling every other season. Exporting wheat to them is basically sending future enemies a neatly packed lunch kit labeled, "Eat well, then invade us later." Charlotte then criticizes Frederick's idea as painfully shallow, since it relies solely on the supply and demand curve without thinking of the broader consequences. Camilla's suggestion scores slightly higher, but free trade is an idea from modern worlds, not in an empire that regularly fights off rebellions. Therefore, Charlotte proposes a clean, stable solution. Stop expanding wheat fields and subsidize farmers to switch part of their land to fruits and vegetables. This naturally reduces wheat supply without causing unrest, and the switch is feasible because these lands once grew barley anyway. She even adds that barley is perfect for producing alcohol, something the empire can export without penalties. The result is a clever strategy that benefits both parties simultaneously. Her explanation is so polished it practically sparkles. She's drawing from microeconomics. After all, she minored in economics back in college, so she's playing on home turf here. No one at the table stands a chance. Of course, Camilla tries to poke holes in her logic, but Charlotte shuts that down by clarifying the land history. It all checks out, and the nobles quickly start praising her sharp mind. Even the emperor looks pleased. That's when Charlotte's fate is sealed. Her attendance at these morning meetings is now mandatory. On the way out, Camilla gives her a shoulder bump far harder than necessary, warning her not to get arrogant and insisting it was just luck. Charlotte politely agrees, fully understanding that royals can insult each other with the politeness of trained assassins. Charlotte lets the pettiness slide. Her mind is already on her next goal, spending time with her fiancé. The two sit together in a beautiful pavilion. As usual, they barely talk, but this time, Duke Adler is quietly watching and observing her. He is probably wondering why his future wife changes her personality as if she were a character in a novel with multiple authors. Since their full names could fill an entire paper, Charlotte suggests they call each other by first names, but he refuses immediately. She takes it in stride and gently says they can take things slow. Then, out of habit, she begins her calm inquiry with the opening line of law enforcement. "You have the right to remain silent." Of course, she immediately apologizes, claiming it's just muscle memory. Feeling a little playful, she tells him she fell in love at first sight and just wants to know everything about him, twirling a strand of hair like she's in a romantic drama. The Duke questions whether that's her in-love face, and she boldly replies that he should see the fire in her eyes, though that fire is for catching the killer, not romance. Priorities. To her credit, Charlotte does find him physically appealing. It's just unfortunate he's also her number one suspect. So yes, she keeps taking notes in between questions, like she's interviewing a witness and a date at the same time. She is truly a unique multitasker. What was her initial question? Of course, it's the classic. Who was your first love? Even she admits it sounds like a love quiz, but the logic is airtight, because in investigations, motive is everything. If he will kill his future wife on their wedding night, Charlotte needs to know whether past romance, unresolved feelings, or resentment could be involved. By the end, she's gathered a neat set of personal data. The Duke is 27 years old, a graduate of the Imperial Military Academy, and currently working as an imperial official. He has one younger sister, and his father passed away last year. He also enjoys swimming as a hobby, but he strongly refuses to comment on his first love. Charlotte concludes the interrogation by saying she won't judge anyone's past, and claims he's the only person on her mind now anyway. She even adds that he doesn't need to keep any secrets from her. She's a very open-minded woman when it comes to her man's past, romantic history included. But the Duke, with that unreadable face of his, simply states he has no first love at all. Whether she believes that or not is entirely her problem. His tone makes it pretty clear he isn't joking. Just when she thinks the interrogation is wrapped up, the tables unexpectedly turn. He has questions too. He wants to know what she sees in him, and whether the rumors about her persistence when in love are true. A simple question, but her mind immediately swerves into panic mode. She keeps a straight face as she begins listing his features like she's reciting a love letter. The bright blonde hair that looks like warm spring sunlight. Those cool blue eyes as clear as a deep lake, porcelain smooth skin, a sharply sculpted nose, refined lips, broad shoulders, a tall frame, a carved-from-stone physique, that deceptively soft yet slightly dangerous voice, and a noble aura so elegant it almost hurts to look at. Charlotte's simple motto is this: if you don't know what to say, bury them under compliments. After she showered him with beauty terms, he simply responded with a quiet, almost clipped, "I see." But at least her interrogation didn't backfire, right? Back in her room, Charlotte finally collapses into her bed like a princess who has reached her personal limit. Mentally drained, physically worn out, and emotionally running on fumes. And yes, Martina notices all of it. The maid gently reports that Jonathan Watson is waiting in the drawing room, but Charlotte is in absolutely no condition to walk even 10 steps. At this point, reputation is the least of her concerns. If society wants to gossip about her receiving a visitor in her bedroom, they'll have to take a number and wait. So she calmly instructs Martina to bring Jonathan inside. When Jonathan enters, Charlotte immediately apologizes for summoning him into her room, explaining that today's chaos has drained every last drop of her energy. Jonathan doesn't question it. He has already witnessed enough to understand that her life is a storm these days. He hands over the documents he gathered. These are Imperial Police investigation records, information so classified that even high-ranking nobles struggle to access them. Naturally, Jonathan doesn't explain how he got them, and she decides not to press the issue. Sometimes the less she knows, the safer she feels. She flips through the pages, taking in the details one by one. Victim 1. A woman in her 20s, a live-in governess at Count Morstan's household. She was strangled with a rope on a weekday afternoon 16 weeks ago. Victim 2. A man in his 30s, head chef at the fancy Sholto Steakhouse. The victim was strangled late at night inside the restaurant 15 weeks ago. Victim 3. A woman in her 40s, owner of a small bakery adored by commoners. She was strangled while en route to volunteer work 10 weeks ago. Victim 4. A man in his 40s, secretary to Marquis Dost, was killed near his home early in the morning 8 weeks ago. All of them were strangled. All of them are different ages, have different backgrounds, and have different schedules. The lack of pattern is almost insulting. Jonathan explains that the killer is assumed to be a physically strong man, at least 180 centimeters tall, with military training. Duke Adler fits the description, but so do hundreds of others. Charlotte quietly absorbs the information, her mind shifting into investigator mode. If she wants to survive past her wedding night, she needs to understand the killer's exact method, and more importantly, the purpose behind these murders. There's no time to waste. Charlotte decides right then that their next step is to investigate the motive and technique behind each killing. Because if she doesn't uncover the truth soon, she'll be joining that victim list as number 8. And she absolutely refuses to die in someone else's storyline. But Charlotte quickly realizes that trying to inspect the crime scenes in person is pointless. The victims died months ago. The sites have been scrubbed clean, and whatever evidence once existed has already vanished into dust. With that in mind, she switches to the only option left, digging through the old investigation files. And of course, Jonathan has questions. He casually asks why the princess is suddenly interested in a string of serial deaths. But since she still doesn't trust him completely, she shuts him down with a light excuse: her trade secret. In other words, don't ask too much, thanks. Then comes her next order for him. Investigate Duke Adler. Past relationships, family history, rumors, scandals. She wants everything, especially the personal details. Outwardly, she frames it as a dutiful fiancé wanting to confirm that her soon-to-be husband is a respectable man. Internally, she's simply trying to survive this storyline. And honestly, if anyone questions her, she can always fall back on the classic villainous excuse. Of course the wicked princess would pry into her fiancé's background. It fits her public image too well. Meanwhile, she sends yet another summons to the Duke, the kind soaked in dramatic affection. When he opens the latest one, he's greeted by the line, "I can't sleep at night because I keep thinking of your handsome face. I miss you so much. It's driving me insane. Can we please meet?" On the outside, she looks like a girl hopelessly in love. On the inside, she's a secret detective with a target board. After a handful of these sweet, sugar-coated letters, something shifts. The Duke finally breaks and responds, agreeing to meet her in front of the opera house at 7 that evening. No imperial pressure needed. He took the bait all on his own. Smart girl. Martina, meanwhile, is over the moon. She's practically bouncing as she gushes about how romantic it is that her princess is going on an opera date. She even starts rushing Charlotte to get ready, insisting that the Duke has to see her at her absolute best tonight. Charlotte arrives at the opera house fully determined to charm her fiancé. But the moment she spots Duke Adler, she unleashes another compliment instead, praising how stunning he looks tonight, and even adding that she almost mistook him for one of the marble statues inside the opera house. And the Duke? He simply stares at her, turns around, and keeps walking. Charlotte briefly wonders if her strategy lost its effectiveness, but she sticks with it. She has no intention of backing down now. The opera they're attending is the most famous in the entire empire. Tickets practically require divine intervention to obtain. Yet despite the prestige, Charlotte feels absolutely no thrill. What's the point of an opera date if her fiancé won't even look at her? And of all places, why here? It's dark, she can't see his facial reactions, and conversation is nearly impossible. She can only sit through it, waiting for the final note to rescue them both. Still, she manages to tell him honestly that she'd rather sit across from him and chat than watch any expensive show, because just seeing his face makes her happy. Sweet words, if only the sincerity matched. Eventually, the Duke puts down the menu he's been holding since before the performance and calmly informs her that he can't meet her every day. His work is demanding, so once a week is the most he can offer. Charlotte's eyes soften into the most adorable puppy gaze, and even the cold Duke Adler shows signs of mortal weakness. After a brief struggle, he adjusts the terms. Twice a week, but absolutely no more than that. She beams, saying that yes, she'd love to see him daily, but twice a week is perfectly fine. And with that, her plan moves to phase 2. Next time, she'll choose somewhere private. But fate has its own sense of humor. Between her mental exhaustion and the opera's lullaby-like melodies, the princess unintentionally dozes off. Not just a tiny nap. No, she falls into full-on deep sleep. And who wakes her? Her fiancé. Long after the audience has left, and the staff has already started cleaning. The embarrassment is enough to make a person evaporate on the spot. Charlotte instantly apologizes, explaining that she hasn't been sleeping well lately. Of course, the real reason is her fear of ever falling asleep near a man who might strangle her like in the original novel, but she keeps that to herself. The Duke, naturally, interprets her words in an entirely different direction. He assumes she's not sleeping because she's too busy thinking about him. His proof? Her excessively lovesick letters? The same ones she wrote purely to bait him. Forced to maintain her cover, Charlotte nods and admits that yes, she has indeed been thinking of him every night. In response, Duke Adler calmly states that from now on, he'll tell her the meeting place in advance, so she can sleep properly before their dates. A few days later, an official invitation to the debutante ball arrives. Martina, still haunted by Charlotte's old obsession era, casually mentions that Archduke Killian will be attending. Charlotte doesn't even blink before reminding her that she has zero interest in that man now. The past is dead, buried, and locked in a vault. But despite the awkward nostalgia, Charlotte decides she will attend. Why? The ball is hosted by House Morstan, which is the same family connected to Victim 1, the governess who was strangled 16 weeks ago. She also wonders why the killer has stopped. Murderers with patterns rarely go silent for 8 whole weeks. That gap, it's suspicious. And where better to pick up clues than the home of the first victim? So she tells Martina she's going to the ball, only to immediately face a tragic crisis. A true royal emergency. Charlotte has nothing to wear. Well, technically she has plenty to wear. However, her wardrobe presents a completely different story. A blue dress that looks like someone turned cotton candy into fabric. A dangerously tiny open-back dress with a neckline that plunges so low it might as well be trying to reach the floor. And a white gown adorned with so many pearl beads, it could easily be mistaken for a bridal ensemble. They aren't flashy, they're simply unhinged. Martina admits, with mild shame, that Charlotte bought all of this to catch Archduke Killian's eye. And to make it worse, the only decent white dress she owns is the same one she wore to Lady Irina's wedding, where she also accessorized it with a veil. Yes, a veil, to someone else's wedding. The audacity of a former villainess is truly something to behold. Katie, a former maid, had tried to stop her back then. She begged Charlotte not to wear the veil, but Charlotte was in full disaster mode and fired the girl for opposing her. Martina had wanted to stop her too. But after that firing, she decided to mind her business for survival reasons. Now they're stuck with the consequences. The entire monthly budget has been emptied on hiring Jonathan and bailing him out, so buying a new dress is not an option. And then, there's that last resort outfit, the one Charlotte refuses to touch. Even Martina hesitates to take it out. The dress evokes such suspicion that Charlotte feels disgusted at its mere sight. The scene shifts to Charlotte's next date with Duke Adler. While they walk together, Charlotte casually tells him that he doesn't have to be her partner for the debutante ball if he doesn't want to. It's meant to sound considerate. Instead of answering, he brings up something else. Yes, that daring letter she wrote in the heat of her love-struck princess act. He hands her the copy he received, creased, wrinkled, and looking like it lived 3 extra lives inside his pocket. The letter boldly declares, "My heart becomes hot at the thought of you. This time I would like to see you somewhere quiet and private. Can we please meet?" Seeing how worn out it is, Charlotte instantly assumes he must have been offended, so she quickly tries to explain that she was just expressing her love, nothing scandalous. That's when he unexpectedly asks, "Are you really in love with me?" And Charlotte? She pours it on thicker than icing on a birthday cake. Heaven, earth, and even the chandeliers of the imperial palace apparently know she's head over heels. She confesses like it's natural for her, like breathing. The Duke raises an eyebrow and asks why, if she loves him so much, she suddenly doesn't want him as her partner at the ball. To him, it sounds suspicious. Out loud, she gives the noble reason. She wouldn't force the man she loves into anything uncomfortable. Internally, she's just trying to avoid unnecessary trouble while she investigates a murder. But then he clarifies that he never said he was uncomfortable. In fact, he fully intends to go to the debutante ball with her, if only to protect his position among high society. A perfectly reasonable explanation. Though it does make me wonder if the Duke is simply a shy man hiding behind etiquette. Still, Charlotte happily accepts. Partner secured. Her happiness lasts all of 10 seconds before anxiety creeps in. She hesitates, fidgets, and then quietly asks, "Would you mind if I show some cleavage that day?" His entire face turns red, bright, ripe tomato red. He coughs out a response, asking if she truly intends to dress immodestly at the ball, trying his hardest to sound unaffected. But the moment she admits she doesn't have enough money to buy a proper dress, something in him seems to click. He turns around sharply, teeth gritted. Charlotte, meanwhile, has absolutely no idea what just happened. Is he offended, embarrassed, or just mentally preparing himself for her fashion disaster? Well, whatever it is, the Duke walks ahead in silence. The next morning's royal banquet arrives, and Charlotte marches in with a mission. Today, she plans to win a budget increase, because honestly, she can't believe how tiny her palace allowance is. She's still a princess, yet her funds look like they were assigned by someone who thought she lived in a broom closet. So, this breakfast? It's her moment to prove she's an investment worth every coin. As soon as she sits, Duke Adler bows to her. Even Charlotte notices the shift, wondering if he finally acknowledges her, or is just being unusually polite out of guilt. Hard to tell with that man. Before anyone even lifts a fork, Camille spots a pancake topped with nuts, her known allergy. She immediately throws a fit. The maid explains that the head chef is absent due to a family matter, but Camille isn't interested in excuses. She simply tells the maid to eat the pancake herself. Then after a few minutes, the discussion begins. Their first topic, the declining number of mana stones and the decreasing population of mages, along with strategies to protect the Empire's future. A serious subject, which Charlotte knows absolutely nothing about. And because fate enjoys chaos, the Emperor suggests they hear her answer first. Internally, Charlotte panics. This is exactly the kind of moment that could expose her. If she gives a weak response, everyone will assume her previous achievements were nothing but luck. The pressure sits on her shoulders like a boulder. But before she's forced to speak, the entire room jolts. The same maid from earlier suddenly trembles and collapses to the floor, and panic ripples through the room. Charlotte instantly senses something is wrong. She hurries toward the fallen woman and checks her symptoms with clinical precision. Purple fingertips, bright red blotches across the skin, a sharp, bitter almond smell on her breath. Anyone else might be confused, but Charlotte recognizes it at once. She glances back and finds Duke Adler watching her. For a brief second, she evaluates him. But this method of murder doesn't match the rope-strangling pattern of the serial killer. So in her mind, he's ruled out. If anything, he looks more startled than everyone else combined. Charlotte quickly instructs the entire room not to touch anything. Not food, not cutlery, nothing. No one should put anything near their mouths or noses. Then she announces, loud enough for everyone to hear. Someone tried to poison the banquet, and the weapon used was cyanide. Later on, the atmosphere in the palace shifts from panic to admiration as the knight in command personally praises Princess Charlotte. Her quick reaction earlier prevented a full royal catastrophe. Their investigation soon confirms the truth. Cyanide had been mixed into the powdered sugar sprinkled on all the pancakes, and the same poison was found in the sugar shaker in the kitchen. Whoever planned this didn't just target one plate. They prepared enough toxin to wipe out the entire banquet. Fortunately, Charlotte noticed the maid who tried to eat the pancake Camille pushed aside. Someone had dusted poisoned sugar not only on the pancakes, but also on the plate itself. The maid who handled, and then tasted, some of the food ultimately became the only victim. While still processing the situation, Charlotte asks the knight if their main suspect is the sous chef. It's the most logical conclusion to the knight in command. The head chef is gone for the day, and the sous chef was the one who prepared the meal. But the problem? The sous chef refuses to confess and insists he knows nothing. Charlotte, however, doesn't buy it for a second. She calmly explains that the real culprit has to be the head chef, the person responsible for planning all weekly meals and supervising core ingredients like sugar and salt. He would have had the perfect opportunity to tamper with the sugar shaker before disappearing. She even warns them that if they don't act quickly, the head chef might already be on the run. Her confidence sends the knights straight into action. And just as Charlotte predicted, the head chef is caught near the border, desperately trying to flee the empire. Everything unravels from there. He's exposed as a spy from the Cortina Republic who infiltrated the palace years ago. To make things worse, Cortina has been resisting imperial rule ever since it was conquered 7 years ago. This isn't even the first attempt. After a previous failed assassination plot by one of their spies, the palace was thrown into 3 days of pure chaos. Everyone who failed to detect the spy back then was executed. After the chaos of the morning feast, Charlotte managed to score huge points with the Emperor. The man was so impressed by how she handled the poison incident that he straight up doubled her palace budget. Not exactly the plan she had originally imagined, but hey, money is money. Now she just hopes the universe lets her enjoy this streak for once. After wrapping up her work in the library, she stepped outside only to realize the hour and the absolute darkness creeping around the palace grounds. One rustle from the bushes was all it took for her imagination to sprint faster than her legs. With the recent assassination attempts lingering in the back of her mind, she instantly assumed a killer was waiting to leap out. And just when she tried to escape the murderer, she tripped on a rock, crashed to the ground, and ended up yelling for help instead. Jonathan came rushing in like a dependable bodyguard, only for Charlotte to barrel straight into him the moment she heard another rustle. The threat? A cute, fluffy, unfailingly innocent cat. If anything, it was the most adorable spy she could have. And yes, Jonathan had the time of his life teasing her about it while escorting her back to her room. She could only grumble that it was too dark to see, which, fair enough. Trying to redirect his laughter, she asked about his investigation into Duke Adler. And on a serious note, Jonathan had done his homework. The Duke's record was spotless. So spotless that even he wondered how a man that handsome had 0 scandals. Honestly, it almost felt like a waste of good genes. But the same couldn't be said about the previous Duke. His family history was messy. Duke Adler's birth mother passed away 5 years ago from illness, leaving the current Duchess as his stepmother. He wasn't close to her, but he was deeply devoted to his younger sister, Lady Blair, the only person tied to him by blood. What puzzled everyone was why he didn't enlist in the Imperial Army after graduating from the military academy. In Asgard, serving in the army was practically a fast pass to social prestige. His refusal to join had left nobles speculating for years. Then Jonathan shifted to another topic: the murder case. He revealed that the first victim turned out to be the previous House Adler's governess. But before he could elaborate, he squinted at Charlotte with amusement, wondering why someone who gets scared by cats was asking him about murder investigations. She shot down his teasing instantly and dragged the conversation elsewhere. Specifically, to her guards, or rather, to the fact that she fired all of them because none of them looked like Killian. Even Jonathan couldn't help but laugh at her reasoning. But once he finished enjoying himself, he casually offered to guard her if she needed someone reliable. And of course, she accepted immediately. A girl knows when to say yes to good protection services. Martina did not take Jonathan's new job lightly. The moment she heard he'd be guarding her princess, she shot him a look so intense it could have bent steel, though somehow it still came off adorable. But the second Charlotte mentioned he volunteered for free, Martina instantly melted into a grateful little marshmallow. Truly, her duality is unmatched. Their mission for the day? Finding Princess Charlotte the perfect outfit for the debutante ball. And of course, Martina and Jonathan were acting like her personal judging panel, ready to approve or reject everything with the seriousness of seasoned fashion critics. The first dress, well, let's just say it didn't do her any favors. Then came the next one, layers upon layers, until she practically resembled a cupcake drowning in frosting. Watching Jonathan and Martina take their judge roles so seriously was honestly its own comedy show. But their patience finally paid off. The moment she stepped out in that blue dress, the atmosphere changed. Charlotte looked like a flower hitting full bloom. Even Jonathan had a stunned expression, as if he accidentally witnessed an angel descend, though he tried to hide it quickly. To shift the attention away from how starstruck he seemed, he gently held her wrist and reminded her she should really eat more. But Charlotte reassured him she's far sturdier than she looks. After their shopping spree, the group stepped out of the boutique only to catch a pack of young noble ladies gossiping. And of course, Duke Adler, the Archduke, and Charlotte herself were the prime topics of their little chirping session. When Charlotte approached, the noble ladies who had been bad-mouthing her immediately tried to escape, leaving Blair feeling stranded like the lone survivor of a sinking ship. But Charlotte invited them for tea, her treat, no less. Even so, every time she tried to join the conversation, the trio completely ignored her and continued their little business discussions. They were all from Camille's supporting families, basically acting as her portable gossip squad. They couldn't reject a princess's invitation, but speaking to Charlotte clearly wasn't on their agenda. Eventually their meeting wrapped up, with one of the girls proudly mentioning a new perfume business scam, investment opportunity, that Blair planned to join. Blair confirmed it, unaware she was about to step into a financial pit. Once the 3 chatterboxes left, Blair thanked Charlotte and prepared to leave too. But Charlotte stopped her. She warned her plainly not to invest in that so-called perfume business. Everything about it screamed scam. No operating business, no products. Just collecting money and waving guaranteed high profits like a giant red flag. Charlotte even offered to compensate whatever profits Blair might have made if the business turned out legitimate, just to show she wasn't talking out of thin air. She simply didn't want Blair getting hurt, especially since they were soon to become family. Blair, touched by the unexpected sincerity, thanked her and promised to update her during her brother's next meeting with Charlotte. The only downside? Charlotte had spent a small fortune treating those gossiping birds to expensive desserts. Her poor wallet suffered a tragic loss that day. Finally, the day of the debutante ball arrived. A new dress was delivered to her palace, one she never ordered. At first, everyone thought it was a mistake, but Charlotte realized quickly that it wasn't. Then a letter from her fiancé arrived, stating he'd pick her up at 6. After she changes into her new dress, everyone is amazed by Charlotte's beauty. Though honestly, I think that the blue dress still suited her better. Before leaving, she instructed Jonathan to take a separate carriage, follow her discreetly to Morston's mansion, and wait until the event ended, just in case. Right on time, her stunning fiancé appeared ready to escort her. During their ride to the ball, he casually asked what she thought of his tuxedo. Charlotte, ever the queen of flattery when cornered, told him no one at the party could possibly outshine him, which, of course, immediately made him think she'd fallen for his looks again. And honestly, watching him slowly turn into a narcissist is hilarious. And yes, it's 100% Charlotte's doing. Charlotte stepped into the debutante ball beside her fiancé, trying her best to look calm, even though her mind was already preparing for the flood of comments about their sudden engagement. This was her first major social event in this world, so she had absolutely no idea what to do. A tiny part of her hoped her fiancé would guide her through it. Her thoughts were immediately cut off when a man approached them. Lord Bridget swooped in with the confidence of someone who definitely talks too much. He commented on Charlotte's appearance, acting surprised to see her looking modest, which, of course, was basically a backhanded insult wrapped in fake politeness. Charlotte, ever the professional survivor, simply thanked him despite knowing exactly what he meant. But the man kept going. He joked that if he'd known she had this gentle side, he would have proposed to her himself, especially since the Emperor had to personally look for a husband for her. In other words, he was implying nobody else wanted her. Charlotte deflected with grace, lightly remarking that he simply wasn't fast enough and apologizing for it. A clean comeback, delivered with a princess smile. When the man tried to excuse himself with Duke Adler, basically attempting to drag the Duke away from her, Charlotte let them go. She actually needed to wander freely today, after all. While her fiancé was away, a crowd instantly formed around him. Even from afar, he still gave off that glowing protagonist aura that drew everyone in. Watching him shine like that reminded Charlotte why the original Charlotte always dressed extravagantly. Attention was her oxygen. It's not like it's not understandable, given that everyone always chooses to stay away from her. Still, Charlotte had work to do, so she slipped away to investigate, only to run directly into the one person she least wanted to see. Archduke James von Killian. He spotted her, glared, and immediately turned around. No hesitation, no greeting. Just pure, I want nothing to do with you. Rude as it was, it checked out. He never bothered hiding his contempt for the imperial family, and especially for Charlotte. Since he was largely responsible for Charlotte being a laughingstock, she decided this was the perfect moment to reclaim a little dignity. Charlotte called him out for insulting a princess by turning his back, reminding him that such behavior was technically lèse majesty. Killian immediately assumed she was trying some new, desperate tactic to get his attention, because apparently the world revolved around him. But she calmly warned him that if he pulled that stunt again, she'd have to call him out. And yes, she could charge him with disrespecting royalty if needed. When she turned to leave, he looked genuinely thrown off, and even asked if she was really walking away just like that. She answered that they had nothing to discuss. She was now engaged to Duke Adler, so he shouldn't delude himself into thinking she still had feelings for him. For her real mission, Charlotte headed to the annex building, where the deceased governess once stayed. The chamber was completely empty, but dusty enough to make her sneeze, loudly, which prompted a nearby servant to rush over. Revealing her identity was out of the question, but she also needed information. So she slipped into her noble princess persona and acted offended instead, scolding the maid for not recognizing her. Predictably, the maid backed down immediately. Nobles in this world were truly allergic to accountability. With the maid intimidated just enough, Charlotte smoothly pressed for information. And the maid, flustered and eager to avoid any trouble, confessed everything. Apparently, the governess had constantly experimented with peaches, covering the entire room with peach fuzz. Even after the cleaning, enough residue remained to give some of the maid's hives. And just like that, the clueless maid had given Charlotte exactly what she needed. On her way back to the party hall, Charlotte suddenly heard a commotion, a whole cluster of noble ladies loudly lamenting their lost fortunes. The exaggerated reactions alone already screamed, "We got scammed." But the real twist was how they were calling Lady Blair disloyal and treacherous. The obvious trick. Fail at something and blame the one person who didn't. Charlotte quickly realized Blair was being cornered inside the room, so she made her way there with the firm intention of helping. After all, she already told Blair not to invest in that nonsense scheme. And clearly, these women were just angry that Blair had been wiser than all of them. Trying to keep things calm, Charlotte initially mentioned that she only butted in because Blair would soon become her sister-in-law. But of course, the ladies turned to mocking her instead, slipping in comments implying that Charlotte couldn't stay loyal to one man. Ah, yes, when all else fails, go for cheap insults. These girls truly came prepared with 0 brain cells. Even when Charlotte warned them that insulting a princess could qualify as an imperial insult, the ladies still acted fearless. Camille's backing must have inflated their egos to dangerous levels. But Charlotte wasn't someone who would quietly retreat just because a few parrots were flapping their wings. If the law wasn't enough to scare them, well, there were faster methods. She grabbed a wine bottle and showed her most terrifying gaze to intimidate them. And just like magic, the cowards started screaming and ran out of the room, calling her a psychopath while nearly tripping over their own skirts. Wow, that reaction was more entertaining than the ball itself. Blair, relieved beyond belief, immediately thanked Charlotte for stepping in and for warning her about the fraudulent investment earlier. She even shared the tea. Lord Ian, the mastermind behind the scam, was knee-deep in gambling problems. In short, the whole high-profit perfume business was doomed from the start, and Charlotte was totally spot on with her previous warnings to Blair. Charlotte, meanwhile, tried to adjust the wine bottle, but it was too heavy. And in her shaky grip, it slipped and shattered against the floor in an impressively dramatic crash. And of course, this was the exact moment Duke Adler entered. His eyes darted from the broken glass to Blair, and then to Charlotte. He instantly assumed that Charlotte was threatening his precious sister. Why? Because those same foolish ladies, Blair's supposed friends, had run past him screaming that Charlotte was a psychopath. Even though Blair tried to explain, he shut her down before she could say more. And naturally, Charlotte admitting she dropped the bottle didn't help her case. It only cemented his belief that she was, well, unhinged. The Duke declared he truly believed she had changed, but now realized she must have just been hiding her real personality. Charlotte, however, had already decided that explaining herself to someone who refused to listen was pointless. So she simply turned around and walked away. Outside the hall, Charlotte's chest tightened with frustration. She mumbles under her breath, still shaken, because all she did was help Blair, and somehow that still made her the villain. Her hands tremble as she thinks about Duke Adler's furious expression earlier. With how he treats her, she wouldn't be surprised if he tried to kill her on the spot just because he felt like it. Just thinking about it makes her knees so weak she can barely make it down the stairs. Thankfully, someone actually decent appears at the right moment. Jonathan notices her wobbling like a wilted flower and immediately walks over. He casually jokes that she made the right decision by escaping the ball. Then he jokingly says that this time he might have to rescue her from a bunny in the garden if she stays out here. Embarrassed, Charlotte asks him to stop teasing her, which makes Jonathan laugh. Seeing how she can barely stand or can't walk properly, he even suggests carrying her in princess style. The man is bold, but at least he's polite about it. Charlotte accepts without hesitation. Resting in her room sounds heavenly right now. And when she shyly asks whether she's heavy, he answers like a true gentleman, saying she's light as a feather. As Jonathan carries her back to the carriage, Duke Adler is already there, standing stiffly as if waiting for something. Charlotte sees him, of course, but she deliberately turns her head away. After the way he treated her earlier? No thanks. Tonight she's choosing peace. Meanwhile, Jonathan tells her in the gentlest tone that the blue dress she tried on the other day actually suits her better than the dress she's wearing now. That tiny compliment is enough to make her smile. Oh my, Jonathan might just have been the sweetest man in the entire ball that night. After that chaotic evening, even Martina can tell something is off. Her princess, who used to send the Duke letters every single day without fail, is now avoiding him. Martina assumes they must have had a disagreement, but their conversation gets cut off when Jonathan suddenly bursts in, completely out of breath. He wastes no time giving Charlotte the grim news. The 5th victim of the serial killer was found earlier that morning, and the victim is none other than Lord Bridget, Cortina's army commander, and the same man who mocked her at the party. Before the story dives into the murder case, the scene shifts to Duke Adler's point of view. House Adler is wealthy, respected, and admired, everything you'd expect from a lineage built on excellence. And Irenaeus von Adler, often called Rhinus, inherited all the things noble families brag about: stature, talent, good looks, and that natural aura that makes people stare whether they want to or not. But that bright, promising life started falling apart piece by piece. Every time someone sent him a marriage proposal, he had them burned. His mother hated this habit, constantly worrying about his future. But Rhinus always answered the same way. Marriage could wait. Her health couldn't. All she wanted was to see him engaged before she passed, yet neither of them got what they yearned for. Then came the day of her funeral. Instead of giving his children space to grieve, their father introduced them to their new stepmother, the woman he met before his wife even fell ill. Rhinus knew that timeline all too well, and rage settled in his chest like a second heartbeat. His mother's death, his father's betrayal, and the arrival of a stepmother he never accepted. All of it sharpened him into someone colder. And when his father died a few years later, Rhinus didn't simply inherit the title. He hid behind it. The man named Rhinus faded, and Duke Adler took his place. Whatever warmth remained in him dimmed further. Then one day, the Duke's mining rights expired. And the Emperor, with impeccable timing that could rival a villain with a master plan, used the situation to marry off his youngest daughter, Princess Charlotte. Rhinus didn't want it, but going against the Emperor wasn't an option. Survival first, emotions later. During their first meeting, he came in ready for a dull, straightforward exchange. He even suggested they not meet again until the wedding. But Princess Charlotte, famously called the delinquent princess, completely derailed his expectations by confessing she'd fallen for him at first sight. She even insisted they should date. He hadn't been prepared for that kind of energy. But as time passed, he started believing she was genuinely falling for him. Her constant compliments, bold, dramatic, and sometimes dangerous to his soul, slowly affected him. Because of her, for the first time in his life, he began to appreciate his own looks. So yeah, he turned into a man who melts at flattery. During their date at the opera, he avoided her gaze entirely, covering part of his face because he was blushing too much. Charlotte had told him she'd rather talk to him privately than enjoy an expensive performance, simply because seeing his face made her happy. What she didn't know was that he had bought premium tickets that cost him 3 times the original price. He had expected her to love the show, not accidentally ruin him with one sincere comment. And then she fell asleep on his shoulder. Rhinus kept telling himself he would gently move her head after one song, but one became 5, and there they stayed. In his mind, it was only natural for a fiancé to rest comfortably on him, and since he believed she had lost sleep from thinking about his handsome face, he even felt responsible. So he decided he would always tell her their meeting schedule ahead of time. For her health, of course. Rhinus's life steadily spiraled out of control as the debutante ball approached, and it was all because of one thing. Charlotte had winked at him during the morning feast. That single wink haunted his soul. Every time her compliments resurfaced in his memory, he felt lighter, happier. The man was unintentionally using Charlotte's praises the way other people use affirmations. Anyway, even his appearance at the ball stemmed from his assumption that Charlotte was eagerly waiting for him to escort her. Alfred, his aide, clearly sensed something was off, especially when Rhinus nervously asked him what it meant when a woman writes that being with her fiancé makes her heart feel hot and that she wants a private moment. Alfred, bless his unprepared soul, replied honestly. He said it likely meant intimate time, then proceeded to advise the Duke to prepare his heart. Rhinus took that advice as if he were preparing for battle. He spent the next few days in a state that could only be described as emotionally malfunctioning. The more he wondered whether Charlotte truly found him irresistible, the harder it became for him to focus on his actual work. At one point, he even reached for adult books. Yes, those books. Because Alfred had once hinted that he should prepare himself before meeting her. And there he was, standing stiffly with a book in hand. The poor man genuinely thought he needed to be ready in case her affections leaned toward something scandalous. On their next date, Charlotte suggested right away that he shouldn't feel pressured to attend the debutante ball as her partner. She even mentioned he didn't seem to enjoy such events, so she would rather not inconvenience him. That simple suggestion hit him like a cold splash of water. For a brief moment, he thought she wanted to go alone, without him. So he made sure she understood that he wanted to escort her because he was her fiancé. The man nearly panicked over a misunderstanding. He even scolded himself internally, thinking he should have sent the invitation first so they wouldn't be having this strange conversation. But then Charlotte casually mentioned she was planning to wear a dress that will show her cleavage. And his brain, like a delicate vase, shattered. The second he returned to his office, he asked Alfred to buy Charlotte a dress that he could personally approve. Something elegant, tasteful, and most importantly, covered. Alfred brought dozens of choices, but nothing satisfied Rhinus. Not one neckline felt safe enough. As a last resort, he went to the boutique himself. That was when he saw it, the dress he had wanted for her, displayed beautifully at one of the stores. Incidentally, it had already been reserved by Lady Whittaker, and the owner apologized. But Rhinus was a man on a mission. He offered a payment 3 times the original price and successfully bought the dress back for Charlotte. Moving on. He had planned to give her the dress during the morning feast. But before he could even bring it up, the poisoning incident happened. The palace shut down, and meeting her became impossible. And speaking of that poison incident, of all the people Charlotte could have looked at in that moment, she looked directly at him first. That tiny glance sent an unexpected rush of joy through him. The man had no idea how painfully obvious his growing attachment already was. When the day of the debutante ball finally arrived, his first thought was relief. Thank goodness he bought her a modest dress. No dangerous neckline and risky exposure. But then he saw how other men were staring at her. Even with a conservative dress, she still caught far too many eyes. Rhinus briefly wondered if he should have chosen something less noticeable. But honestly, Charlotte could wear a potato sack and still outshine half the hall. Then, enter Lord Bridget, the very same man who would later become victim number 5, had a long history of being weirdly jealous of Rhinus since their academy days. The man pretended to be friendly, but his behavior gave Rhinus the chills. A classic case of smiling while plotting. Everything Bridget said irritated him, which was why Rhinus hoped Charlotte would decline when Bridget invited the Duke to step aside with him. As they walked away, Rhinus kept glancing back at Charlotte whenever he could. If she looked even slightly unhappy, he planned to use her expression as an excuse to abandon Bridget and return to her immediately. But to his dismay, she only smiled and waved at him. Bridget really had the audacity of a man who lived his whole life without consequences. In front of all those glittering guests, he proudly announced that he once rescued Duke Adler from the worst lady in the empire. And he even added a dramatic tale about Charlotte supposedly throwing tantrums just to force Rhinus into attending the ball as her partner. Rhinus was furious, of course, but the timing couldn't be worse. Rumors had already been flying around about Princess Charlotte stealing a dress from Lady Whittaker. And just like Bridget, Lady Whittaker had a personality so unpleasant it could curdle fresh milk. Her version of events? Charlotte supposedly stormed into the boutique, demanded the dress, and bullied her into surrendering it. She even painted herself as the exhausted victim who couldn't sleep at night because Charlotte snatched her precious reservation. The spectators didn't even care whether her story made sense. They immediately began whispering that Charlotte was shameless. Ah yes, classic gossip where accuracy is not required. Rhinus, already fed up, confronted Lady Whittaker directly about the dress, and the lady looked him straight in the eyes and lied, confidently. She even added that Charlotte had said horrible things to her that day. But no matter how many times he pressed her, her story didn't change. So that's when Rhinus dropped the truth like a hammer. He admitted he bought the dress. He was the shameless one everyone was talking about. And just for good measure, he added that Lady Whittaker wasn't even at the boutique when he purchased it. Naturally, she tried to backpedal, claiming she misspoke and that the boutique owner had told her the whole story. Rhinus cut her off, pointing out the owner didn't even know the dress was for Princess Charlotte. Her excuse crumbled faster than stale bread. But she still refused to apologize, so Rhinus reminded her that despite losing the dress, she had been compensated and received a free new one. So why was she pretending to be a tragic heroine? Finally, he delivered the finishing blow. If she wanted to lie, she could at least make her story consistent, and that he would never tolerate anyone inventing nonsense about his fiancé. The bystanders, of course, now stared at Lady Whittaker as if she'd just exposed herself as the Empire's new iconic fool. And then Bridget jumped back in. He tried defending Lady Whittaker and even slung more mud at Charlotte, claiming she had a reputation for bad behavior and constant lying. Rhinus didn't bother hiding his disgust at this point. He simply noted how strange it was to hear such preaching from someone infamous for, let's call them, activities, in Cortina. The argument would have continued, but Archduke Killian arrived, instantly scattering the noblewomen like startled birds. Rhinus also noticed Charlotte had slipped away, probably to greet the Archduke, and that alone annoyed him more than the entire gossip circus combined. But Bridget had one more burst of stupidity left in him. He joked that if he were as popular as the Archduke, he wouldn't push any ladies away. He'd have fun with all of them. Then he mused that maybe the Archduke already had his fun, and Charlotte was just throwing herself at him again like before. Rhinus clenched his wineglass so hard it snapped at once. He told Bridget he had crossed a line. Then, with the elegance of a man disposing of something filthy, he tossed his used handkerchief at Bridget like trash. He walked off, saying Bridget would take responsibility for every word he just said. As Rhinus wandered through the hallway in search of his fiancé, his entire mood was sinking faster than a ship with holes on every side. He felt physically sick just being at this event, and truth be told, he wouldn't have stepped foot in this ball if he hadn't been Charlotte's partner. Just then he happened to catch a glimpse of Charlotte speaking with Archduke Killian. And of course, he didn't stay long enough to see how the conversation actually ended. Why? Because his mind immediately flashed back to that day when Charlotte told him he didn't need to accompany her if he didn't intend to. In his jealousy-soaked imagination, that sentence suddenly morphed into, "Don't come because Killian will be there." That was all it took. Add the fact that Charlotte had a reputation for lying, and the noble ladies shrieking that she was insane, and his misunderstanding inflated to a dangerous size. The kind of reason that packs up, leaves, and slams the door behind it. So he lashed out at her without hesitation. Fueled by jealousy he refused to acknowledge. When Charlotte eventually walked away from them, Blair immediately tore into him. She explained, loud and clear, that the princess had protected her earlier from being bullied, and that the spilled wine was an accident. Blair didn't sugarcoat anything as she cries. She pointed out he'd made Charlotte walk away because he spoke first and understood later, a pattern he seemed surprisingly committed to. Rhinus did try to follow Charlotte afterward to apologize and explain himself, but fate had other plans. Jonathan arrived, swept the princess into his arms, and carried her off before Rhinus could even open his mouth. And when Charlotte finally noticed Rhinus standing behind her, she turned her head away without hesitation. A few days later, the princess, who used to send him letters every single day, suddenly stopped. Complete silence. Blair, who knew the cause better than anyone, wasted zero time calling Renius a moron. She bluntly said that Charlotte was probably done with him, and if she were Charlotte, she wouldn't want to look at his face either. Rhinus tried to brush it off, claiming it didn't matter since he and Charlotte wouldn't meet until the wedding anyway. But the miserable look on his face absolutely betrayed him. Even he couldn't pretend he believed his words. He kept insisting it didn't affect him whether the princess stopped loving him. Yet the moment Alfred announced a letter from Princess Charlotte had arrived, his entire face lit up like someone had handed him the sun. But that joy didn't last long, because the letter wasn't a love note. And Alfred's next words made Rhinus freeze in terror. The princess was currently in police custody. Just like that, his heart dropped straight into his stomach at the single thought that his helpless fiancé was inside the prison cell. A few hours before Rhinus bolted out of his mansion in full panic mode, the Empire woke up to grim news. Victim number 5 had been discovered in an alley off Norwood Street. The same strangulation marks, the same killer profile. And the victim? Another man with formal military training. Norwood Street, by the way, wasn't just any back alley. It was the slum. The part of the capital everyone pretended didn't exist. Beggars, criminals, shadows moved like they had secrets. Basically the perfect place for a serial killer to prowl. With the body already sitting in the police station's morgue, Charlotte realized she couldn't just stroll in as Princess Charlotte unless she wanted to be the headline of tomorrow's gossip scrolls. And when she learned the station had holding cells, her mind cooked up an absolutely unhinged, but brilliant plan. She disguised herself using a wig and Martina's clothes, which she used without permission or hesitation. Then she ordered Jonathan to tail her, wait until the cops dragged her off, and make sure her plan didn't get her killed. To complete the act, she took the wine bottle she carried and chugged it like her life depended on it. And then chaos walked into the streets. 30 minutes later, Princess Charlotte, now fully disguised and absolutely reeking of "I had a terrible night and worse decisions," ended up detained for public intoxication. Imperial law said anyone who terrified their surroundings with drunken rampaging got tossed into a holding cell. The charge was minor, the bail was inexpensive, and as long as her identity remained concealed, it would not trigger a political upheaval. More importantly, this minor arrest placed her precisely where she was needed. Since everyone already assumed she was drunk out of her mind, it wouldn't seem strange if she acted dramatic or nosy. Perfect cover. She confirmed with a nearby officer that the victim's body was indeed in the morgue, conveniently located right next to her holding cell. Her next move? Pretend her bladder was about to burst and demand to be taken to the restroom, threatening to have a chat with the officer's boss if he refused, or just do her thing inside that same holding cell. Her acting tricks didn't come from theater. She proudly learned them from criminals she used to deal with. With everyone busy focusing on the ongoing murder investigation, no one paid much attention to a frail, staggering, drunk girl, exactly how she wanted it. So she secretly goes inside the morgue instead of the bathroom. When Charlotte finally laid eyes on the corpse, her suspicions sharpened immediately. The victim's face was far too pale for a strangulation case. A living person strangled with a rope would show petechial hemorrhages, tiny burst blood vessels, but his face was spotless. His neck also lacked any defensive wounds. A trained soldier who didn't fight back? Absolutely impossible. What he did have, however, were red blotches scattered across his body, the type she recognized as signs of a poison-induced reaction, meaning the killer poisoned him first, then staged the strangulation afterward. Even without knowing how advanced the Empire's forensics were, Charlotte could already tell the killer had fooled the police completely. But the bigger mystery was why the killer even bothered to fabricate the cause of death. While she pondered this, the officer escorting her assumed she was still tipsy and started babbling about the murder weapons. Charlotte didn't waste the opportunity. Her eyes locked on the strange knot tied in the ropes, and she made sure to memorize every detail, especially after realizing it was the same type of rope found at the murder scene. Everything was going smoothly, until Jonathan delivered the one message she would rather not hear. He couldn't act as her guarantor, because unfortunately for her plan, Jonathan was a felon on probation, one she personally released. And if her father caught wind of this disaster, her palace allowance would evaporate on the spot. So, out of options and facing budget death, she sent a letter to Duke Adler requesting help. And then, bam! In storms, Duke Adler, sweating, breathless, and clearly having sprinted like the world was ending. Charlotte immediately deployed her strongest weapon, her effective compliments. Charlotte quickly praised how great he looked even while sweating buckets, which actually worked faster on him than any magic. When he asked why she was locked up, she dismissed the question with a confidence that only she possessed. After all, girls just want to have fun too. And now that her knight in shining armor had arrived, she quietly begged him to help her get out, while insisting he absolutely must not reveal she was the princess. So here they stood, a police station neck-deep in a serial murder case. A drunk troublemaker in custody, and a fiancé vouching for her identity while trying not to look like a criminal himself. It had all the ingredients of a misunderstanding waiting to explode. But hey, at least it made for a wonderfully chaotic reunion. Once Charlotte was released, she and Rhinus ended up walking side by side. She kept sneaking glances at him, bracing herself for the scolding of the century. When she nervously thanked him and apologized for dragging him into such a ridiculous situation, admitting she had no one else to turn to, she expected frustration, maybe even a little anger. Instead, he simply asked if she was hurt anywhere. And when she assured him she was fine, he finally let out a quiet breath of relief. Then, completely out of nowhere, Rhinus looked at her and asked her to go on a date that very day, something she absolutely did not expect. Rhinus tried to play it cool, but anyone with eyes could see he was a little shy. He had cleared his entire schedule just for her, and since she was already there in front of him, he didn't want the chance to slip away. Charlotte, meanwhile, saw an entirely different opportunity. If they were going on a date, then she might as well use it to investigate victim number 2, the head chef. So she suggested they visit the restaurant where the man used to work. Once they arrived, Charlotte noticed something interesting. Rhinus ordered his steak well done and not medium rare. She couldn't help but mentally judge it. She preferred her steak with a bit of blood, juicy, soft, the way it was meant to be eaten. But she let him enjoy his burned-to-crisp style in peace. While they ate, Rhinus finally asked the question sitting on his mind all morning. Why was she drinking in Norwood while disguised? Charlotte gave him the most casual explanation. There was a famous pub there, she wanted to drink a lot, and she didn't want to create new rumors by showing up as herself. When he pressed about why she needed to drink so heavily, she admitted she'd been feeling stressed, hurt, and frustrated. Some days she just wanted to forget everything for a moment. And of course, Rhinus took that straight to heart. He instantly assumed she had been drinking because of him. That guilt hit him hard. He apologized for everything that happened at Lady Morstan's debutante ball. His temper, his assumptions, all of it. And when he thanked her for helping Blair, he actually blushed. Charlotte brushed it off in a very Charlotte way, saying she was helping Blair because they were going to be family soon. The moment she said family, Rhinus turned even redder. The man was basically a tomato at that point. From the Duke's perspective, this whole situation with Charlotte was unsettling. All his life, things went his way. But ever since he got involved with her, nothing followed the usual pattern. Even that morning, when he realized she needed help, he discovered the carriages were all being used by Blair and his stepmother. He couldn't wait half an hour for a replacement, not when Charlotte was depending on him. So he sprinted across the capital like a man being chased by wild dogs. And after all that running, what greeted him? Charlotte wearing plain clothes, no makeup, and still looking adorable enough to scramble his brain. He tried blaming it on the fact that he was out of breath, but even he knew that wasn't the real issue. What truly unsettled him was the charge against her, public intoxication. When he tried to ask Alfred for advice, he pretended it was about his friend. According to him, this friend's fiancé suddenly stopped writing letters and might be planning to break off the relationship. Alfred answered honestly, saying people often change their hairstyle or drink too much when they want to break up. And just like that, Rhinus convinced himself Charlotte had worn a wig and gone drinking because of him. Then earlier, Charlotte admitted she drank to forget her pain. That was all the confirmation Rhinus needed. He believed she had broken down because he acted like an idiot at the ball. So he apologized for the first time in his life, swallowing his pride as if it were the hardest medicine he'd ever taken. Charlotte forgave him just as easily, and the relief that washed over him was almost visible. For the first time, he felt like maybe she was someone who could genuinely understand him. With that comforting thought growing in his chest, he wondered if maybe he could tell her the thing he had never once told anyone else. Charlotte listened as Rhinus finally opened up. He admitted he hadn't even wanted to come to this restaurant in the first place, because the last time he visited, he had a terrible experience. Being deep in her detective mode, she instantly assumed he was referring to memories of the head chef's murder. But nope. The truth was, 2 months ago the head chef had ignored Rhinus's request and served him a medium-rare steak instead of well done, insisting it tasted better that way. The Duke explained that whenever he smelled blood, even just the faint scent from a steak, he panicked. It wasn't about preference, it was trauma. A military academy graduate? Panicking at the smell of blood? The irony practically slapped Charlotte across the face. Rhinus continued anyway. He said Charlotte didn't need to look sad for him, but the truth was unavoidable. When his mother died, she had vomited blood right in front of him. Ever since then, any hint of that smell made his chest tighten and his breath shorten. That was why he never enlisted after graduating, even though everyone expected him to. And then came the guilt. He confessed he often wondered if his mother would still be alive had he stayed home instead of going to the academy, especially since his father wasn't exactly known for taking good care of his mother. Charlotte listened, feeling her own chest tighten at the thought. She offered her condolences, but she also couldn't help asking why he chose to tell her something he'd never told anyone else. Rhinus softly smiled and admitted he wasn't sure. Maybe it was because they would soon become family. Maybe it was because she simply felt safe to talk to. Either way, the words made Charlotte's heart soften in a way she didn't expect. Immediately, she changed her steak order to well done. Rhinus tried to reassure her that he wasn't sensitive enough to smell the blood from someone else's plate, but Charlotte insisted. She made a random excuse about suddenly craving it well done, even though she had made a whole speech earlier about how steak wasn't good unless it still had blood in it. He didn't miss the irony and lightly teased her for it. Charlotte brushed him off with the claim that she enjoys meat no matter how it's cooked. But the truth was simple. She understood him, deeply, because she had lived through something painfully similar. In her previous life, she had begged her parents to take her to an amusement park, a trip they saved and planned for just to make her happy. On their way home, their small car was crushed in a horrible accident. She was the only one who survived. And for so many years, she blamed herself. If she hadn't begged and had just stayed home that weekend, maybe her parents would still be alive. She knew exactly what that kind of guilt felt like. So while sitting across from Rhinus now, she felt an unexpected pull of empathy. She reached out and told him honestly that none of it was his fault, and he deserved to let go of the burden he'd been carrying for so long. That night, Charlotte kept replaying what had happened earlier in her head. She came out here to investigate her suspicious fiancé, and somehow ended up comforting him instead. It was the kind of moment that made her wonder if she was the one getting off track. But instead of dwelling on the awkward warmth she felt for him, Charlotte forced herself back into detective mode and started piecing everything together. Her thoughts narrowed into two main theories. First, someone else might have killed Bridget and staged the scene to look like part of the serial murders. A classic copycat situation, messy but possible. Second, and far more convincing, was the poisoning angle. Every victim, including the newest one, seemed to lack the usual signs of strangulation. The knot used each time was identical, too clean and precise. And now that she had seen the fifth victim's body up close, the lack of defensive wounds made everything click into place. Someone poisoned them first, and then staged the strangling afterward. From what she'd seen around the palace, even regular maids tied knots differently when they took out the trash. Meaning, the killer's technique was distinct, too consistent to be random. The more she thought about it, the more obvious it became that the murderer didn't need to be a tall, muscular man at all. Poison didn't require brute strength. It only required access. And that opened the door to a much wider suspect list. Days earlier, Lady Blair had mentioned some crucial intel for Charlotte. Victim 1, the former governess of the Adler household, had been fired by Duke Adler himself. She was too focused on her dissertation, neglecting her duties, so he dismissed her. His stepmother had objected, saying he should have been more patient, but Rhinus didn't listen. After her dismissal, the governess found her next job with Lady Morstan, and ended up dead. The pattern didn't stop there. Victim 2, the head chef, had also gotten on the nerves of the Duke by refusing his steak preference. Two victims, both connected to Rhinus. Both had upset him in some way. Yes, the Duke had a cold exterior and a habit of speaking like he was permanently annoyed with the world. But would he really commit murder over something so trivial? Those were inconveniences, not motives. Charlotte was seeing cracks in that story more and more. Her suspicion of him had started with the novel's introduction. But real Rhinus, the one who panicked at the smell of blood, apologized earnestly, and blushed over the word family, didn't fit the image of a serial murderer. So now her mind circled one question. If her fiancé wasn't the killer, then who was? A few days after the poisoning incident, the morning banquet arrived like nothing ever happened. Charlotte barely sat down when she noticed Camille's smug little smile aimed straight at her. That look alone already screamed trouble. And sure enough, Marquise d'Ost was present as well, sitting a little too confidently for someone who usually followed Camille's lead. Charlotte didn't need a crystal ball to guess what was coming next. As expected, once the Emperor gave his permission, Marquise d'Ost brought up a long-standing issue in the Empire's legal system. It was a law that had been complained about for nearly a decade and still hadn't been fully resolved. On the outside, it sounded like a harmless request for advice. In reality, it was clearly meant to corner Charlotte. Unfortunately for Camille, this was exactly Charlotte's field. Naturally, Charlotte was the first one asked to speak about the strengths and weaknesses of revising that law. Charlotte explained the issue clearly, laid out the risks, and suggested improvement so cleanly that the room quietly fell into listening mode. Even Marquise d'Ost, who clearly expected to dominate the conversation, ended up nodding along and praised Charlotte's reasoning. The Emperor looked downright pleased. He openly praised Charlotte for her dedication, mentioning how often she studied in the library, and remarking that she truly seemed like a different person lately. Camille just sits there frowning like the main character role got snatched from her mid-scene. Soon after, a new announcement shifted the atmosphere again. Notice for the upcoming Imperial Confederation banquet was handed to the Emperor. This was the annual event where leaders and high-ranking officials from Asgard's vassal states gathered to show unity and loyalty. In practice, it was less about harmony and more about proving who bowed the lowest to the Emperor. Cortina, of course, was excluded this year due to their little assassination attempt. No surprises there. What did surprise everyone was the Emperor's declaration that this year's banquet would be the largest one yet. He made it very clear that no vassal state would dare follow Cortina's example after witnessing what loyalty truly looked like. Then came the real shock, when the Emperor announced that Charlotte's birthday celebration would be held at his palace this year. Traditionally, royal children celebrated their birthdays in their own palaces, unless the Emperor personally chose them. That honor had gone to Camille for several years in a row, which was why everyone assumed she was the favored successor. But now that pattern had changed. Charlotte remembered Prince Felipe's words from the poisoning incident. Without Charlotte's intervention that day, everyone would have died, except Camille. Even without solid proof, it was obvious that the Emperor had started to question things. Camille's expression cracked instantly. She shot Charlotte a sharp glare, despite Charlotte not doing anything, and stormed off without another word. Just as the tension settled, Duke Adler appeared beside Charlotte. With a blush, he reminded her about their scheduled date for the day, asking if she had forgotten. The way he said it made it painfully clear he'd been thinking about it for a while. And so, the two of them walked side by side, taking in the view as if the day had suddenly slowed down just for them. Charlotte still felt a little thrown off by how the Duke had approached her earlier. Now that she was starting to believe he might not be the real killer, being alone with him felt different, but not in a bad way. The silence stretched long enough to get uncomfortable, so Rhinus broke it first. He casually mentioned that Charlotte seemed very knowledgeable about imperial law and asked if she studied it in her spare time. Charlotte answered honestly and said it was her major. That response completely went over his head, so he asked what a major even meant. Charlotte explained it simply, saying it was the main focus of her studies. Rhinus nodded like that cleared everything up, even if it probably didn't. Then he smoothly changed the topic and asked if she would be his partner at the upcoming imperial banquet. Charlotte blinked more than once and even asked if she heard him correctly. Rhinus quickly insists that he really enjoys imperial banquets, making it clear that she doesn't need to worry about him feeling uncomfortable. It was obvious he was trying to fix a mistake from before. The memory of Charlotte telling him he didn't need to accompany her to the debutante ball had clearly stuck with him. Charlotte understood right away. She smiled and said she'd love to attend the celebration with him. But her confusion wasn't done for the day. Rhinus suddenly asked if she had anything she wanted to tell him. When she answered that she didn't, his mood dropped instantly. The change was so sudden it almost gave her whiplash. Charlotte panicked internally for a split second, trying to figure out what she'd missed. Carefully testing the waters, she pointed out that he had something on his cheek, then immediately followed it up by saying it was actually just his handsomeness. The reaction was instant. So yes, the cold Duke was secretly running on daily compliments like they were emotional fuel. Charlotte couldn't help but feel even more confused. How could someone this awkward and oddly adorable possibly be a serial killer? At this point, the idea just felt ridiculous. Rhinus tried to shift the conversation and landed on her dress instead, the one that got ruined at the debutante ball. Since the mess happened while Charlotte was helping his sister, he said he wanted to make it up to her by buying her a new dress for the upcoming event. Charlotte turned him down right away. She mentioned that her budget had increased, so she didn't really need him to do that. However, he wasn't letting it go. He admitted that he had been rude to her at the ball and said he hated owing anyone, especially her. To fix things properly, he suggested she get her outfit from Himeres, the most famous boutique in the empire. Getting a reservation there was nearly impossible unless someone had a VIP status. So Charlotte made a deal. If he could secure a reservation for her, she would go. But she would still pay for the dress herself. Rhinus agreed finally with a smile. Martina nearly burst with happiness when she found out Charlotte had a reservation at Jiménez. With the imperial banquet coming up and Charlotte's birthday celebration being held at the emperor's palace, her choice could completely change how people saw her princess. Martina got even more excited when she added that this was their chance to finally outshine Camille's side. She had overheard that Princess Camille failed to get a reservation at Jiménez, and Martina was absolutely certain Camille was furious about it. Jonathan happened to hear all this and innocently asked if nobles really needed new dresses for every important event. Martina immediately launched into a lecture, offended by the question. Charlotte, however, agreed with Jonathan. Even she thought buying that many dresses was excessive. Martina reminded her that Charlotte used to never wear the same outfit twice, clearly blaming amnesia for this sudden practicality. Charlotte flopped onto her bed and complained about how stressed she was. There was too much to study before the big event, and the thought alone made her tired. She dramatically declared that she would rather spend the whole day choosing a dress instead. Martina quickly told her to behave more like a proper lady. That was when Charlotte noticed Jonathan turning red. Completely flustered, he made a quick excuse, bowed out of the room, and promised to return the next day with his report. As Charlotte watched Jonathan walk away, her thoughts drifted back to the report he had given earlier that day. During the debutante ball, Bridget and Duke Adler had been openly hostile toward each other. Not long after that night, Bridget vanished, only to be found dead later on. When Charlotte asked why someone as high-ranking as Bridget would even be in Norwood, Jonathan explained that Bridget had been secretly meeting people tied to a local human trafficking ring. And honestly, that tracked. Bridget had always had a terrible reputation. After joining the Imperial Army, he climbed the ranks fast and became the commander of Cortina's army. But his rise came with a dark side. He was infamous for his brutal treatment of the Cortina people. Before his death, he had been involved in smuggling war orphans from Cortina and selling them as slaves across the empire. It was illegal, but without solid proof, the empire couldn't touch a noble like him. Jonathan had been furious while explaining this, his jaw tight, as he complained about how imperial law favored nobles and crushed commoners without mercy. When Jonathan asked whether she had discovered anything while examining Bridget's body at the morgue, Charlotte quickly gave an excuse. She claimed she hadn't found anything because corpses scared her. That part wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. She still wasn't sure Jonathan himself wasn't the real serial killer, and she wasn't about to reveal more than she had to. Her doubts about Jonathan didn't come from nowhere. Jonathan Watson had once submitted a full report exposing Lord Bridget's crimes against the people of Cortina to his superior, Major Kensington. Instead of acting on it, the Major ordered him to bury everything. When Jonathan refused, the Major pulled a gun on him. Fearing for his life, Jonathan fought back and subdued him, only to be charged later with assaulting a superior officer. To make matters worse, Bridget had served as the key witness during Jonathan's trial, dealing a serious blow to his case. So yes, Jonathan had a reason to hate Bridget. A strong one. That alone meant Charlotte couldn't trust him fully yet. Then again, given her situation, trusting anyone completely felt reckless. Fast forward to the day Charlotte finally visits the Jiménez boutique. The shop owner personally welcomed her, clearly eager to show off the finest dresses they had. As racks of luxurious gowns appeared one after another, Charlotte and Martina leaned toward each other, whispering nervously about whether they could afford whatever was coming next. Backing out now wasn't an option. They were already there, and the fitting began. Every dress Charlotte tried on looked stunning. Each one seemed to highlight her charm even more, as if the dresses had been made for her alone. Even Jonathan couldn't stop himself from blushing. His reaction said enough without him needing to say a word. After much consideration, Charlotte finally chose a dress. Then came the part she had been dreading, the payment. Her nerves kicked in as she reached for the bill, fully convinced she had picked the most expensive dress in the shop. She even scolded herself in her head, thinking she should have just let her fiancé pay for it. But when she looked at the amount, the price wasn't even half of what she had paid for her last dress. Charlotte asked the shop owner if the price was correct, half expecting a mistake. The woman calmly assured her that they would never sell at a loss, and that the price was accurate. Charlotte paid, though the something fishy feeling didn't leave her. When they stepped outside, Rain was pouring down. Unfortunately, they also had a reservation at the general store. Charlotte suggested they could call for a carriage and walk until they found one, but Jonathan immediately volunteered to fetch an umbrella for her. He was genuinely worried, especially knowing how frail she was compared to him, a former soldier with a strong build. Without hesitation, Jonathan dashed into the heavy rain. Watching him, Charlotte thought that while Jonathan could be a little cold at times, but he was also diligent and reliable. All things considered, she had chosen a solid assistant and personal guard. Martina, however, was quicker to ground her. She reminded Charlotte that they still didn't know what Jonathan was truly thinking. Getting too attached would only lead to trouble, especially since once Charlotte married the Duke, Jonathan's role by her side would come to an end. But Charlotte quickly said Jonathan is more devoted to his salary than to her. Their little talk shifted back to the dress, and Charlotte finally shared her little suspicion that her fiancé might have pulled some strings behind her back. Martina was halfway into agreeing when Duke Adler himself showed up. Rhinus casually asked if she enjoyed talking about him when he wasn't around, which instantly put Charlotte on edge. She rushed to explain that she had managed to buy an amazing dress, and that it only happened because of him. When Charlotte asked why he was there, Rhinus admitted the building belonged to his family. He said he had stopped by to handle some business, and hadn't expected to run into her at all. Charlotte smiles while her brain immediately jumps to the conclusion that this man might be stalking her and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Still, she plays it sweet and says it must be fate that they met. That answer earns her a very pleased smile from the Duke. Right on cue, Alfred stepped in to remind Rhinus that it was time to leave. Rhinus introduced his aide to Charlotte, and that was when Charlotte's mind went into overdrive. She started imagining all the ways she could squeeze information out of Alfred for her investigation. Purely professional, of course. Rhinus, however, read the situation very differently. In one swift move, he pushes Alfred aside and tells him to go get the carriage. Then Rhinus asks if Charlotte has anything to say to his aide, casually adding that there's no reason she should be interested in Alfred anyway. Charlotte shuts that down immediately. When he pressed her about why she'd been looking at Alfred that way, she improvised. She threw in a wink and said her eyes were only on him, pretending she had no idea what he was talking about. That single move wiped away his jealousy in seconds. Mission accomplished. Before leaving, Rhinus handed Charlotte his umbrella and excused himself, saying he had an appointment he couldn't miss. Everything seemed fine, until Charlotte noticed a very familiar knot tied into the umbrella. A small detail, but enough to make her pause. On the way to their meeting with the president of the Imperial Bank, Alfred commented on the Duke's slightly wet clothes. Rhinus brushed it off as nothing worth mentioning. What caught his attention instead was Alfred's appearance. He stared a bit too long. Alfred pointed out in a panicked tone that the Duke was the one who paid far more attention to his appearance than he ever did. He added that Rhinus had changed clothes twice that morning because he didn't like his outfit and had been expecting to see Charlotte. Rhinus denied it immediately, as if saying it louder would somehow make it less obvious. But what Charlotte didn't know was that Rhinus had gone all out behind the scenes. She had only paid 10% of the dress's real price, and she'd been given exclusive access to Chimera's boutique that day. The shop owner was ordered to reject every other reservation for the upcoming Imperial Confederation banquet. No rival nobles, no matching gowns, and no rumors spreading about Charlotte's dress. She would be the only one wearing Chimera's that night, courtesy of her future husband. Losing a year's worth of rent from that shop didn't bother him one bit. That smile she'd given him earlier was enough. He wanted her to stand out, and he wanted everyone to know it. Meanwhile, Jonathan finally returned, completely soaked from running through the rain. He stopped short when he saw Charlotte already holding an umbrella. Once he learned that Duke Adler had given it to her, he commented that she must be quite close to the Duke if he'd lent her something like that. Charlotte thanked Jonathan and offered him the umbrella instead, but he refused, saying he was already drenched anyway. No point now. That response sounded reasonable, but the look on his face said otherwise. Someone was definitely sulking, even if he'd never admit it. And just as expected, Charlotte caught a cold in the middle of summer. She lay in bed burning up, but somehow, her thoughts circled back to that umbrella. More specifically, the knot tied around it. She tried to reason with herself, saying there was no proof Rhinus tied it himself, and at some point, She realized she was defending him in her head. But why did she want him to be innocent so badly? Charlotte admitted that Rhinus had shown her a few surprisingly human moments. But that didn't erase the facts. He was still her top suspect, feelings or not. Martina hovered nearby, worried sick over Charlotte's high fever. She mentioned that she had already sent a note to Lady Blair to cancel their tea party. Before Charlotte could even respond, another maid rushed in and announced that Duke Adler had arrived. The moment Charlotte heard her fiancé was there, she jolted upright, immediately coughing like her lungs took personal offense. Martina, of course, looked thrilled. This was proof that the Duke cared enough to rush over after hearing about Charlotte's illness. The maid of the year wasted no time letting him in. When Rhinus entered the room, he froze. Charlotte looked flushed, sweaty, and very much unwell. She apologized for letting him see her like this. That sight alone made Rhinus swallow hard. He quickly said she had nothing to apologize for. Rhinus then clarified, a bit stiffly, that he truly had no habit of entering women's rooms without permission. Charlotte simply nodded and said she believed him. Then she casually added that she also knew he wouldn't mind someone entering her bedroom either. That single remark left Rhinus stunned, but he quickly tried to compose himself. Charlotte then asked why he came, since she didn't remember having plans with him that day. Another coughing fit followed, which made Rhinus ask if she was really okay. She waved it off, saying it was just a cold and she'd recover soon. As for his reason for visiting, Rhinus claimed he came to retrieve his umbrella, saying it was important to him. Charlotte didn't buy that for a second. A man like him didn't travel all this way just for an umbrella. She labeled it suspicious behavior and added it to her mental crime board. After she told him where the umbrella was, Rhinus suddenly asked why she stopped sending him letters every day. Charlotte explained that since he already told her when they would meet, she thought daily letters might bother him. Rhinus immediately said it was no trouble at all. In fact, he had been waiting for her letters. He added that if she had written to tell him she was sick, he wouldn't have shown up unannounced. It was obvious he was just worried and didn't know how to say it properly. When Charlotte warned him not to come closer, saying she didn't want him to catch her cold, Rhinus ignored the warning and stepped closer anyway, saying he wouldn't catch it unless things got much more intimate, especially in a bedroom. Then he reached out and gently removed a piece of tissue stuck in her hair. Charlotte thanked him, her voice shaky, suddenly very aware of how close he was and how intense his gaze felt. Rhinus then lightly grabbed her wrist and commented on how fragile she seemed, saying he felt like he could break her easily. The closeness and his words sent her heart into chaos. Remembering advice from his sister and aide about how passing a cold might cure the sick person faster, Rhinus leaned in, clearly preparing to test that theory himself. The moment teetered right on the edge of their first kiss, until a knock slammed into the door. Martina entered with tea, completely unaware that she had ruined a first kiss opportunity for this couple. She cheerfully mentioned the lovely bouquet the Duke brought. Flustered, the Duke said he had just thrown it together on the way there. He even claimed the flowers were lying around in his garden, which made absolutely no sense and convinced no one. Before rushing out, he told Charlotte to take good care of herself. Not exactly the words of a cold-blooded killer. He even forgot all about the umbrella excuse and bolted. Charlotte let out a long sigh and collapsed back onto her bed, thinking she could finally rest. That peace lasted about 2 seconds. Jonathan showed up with a smug look and reminded her that he warned her she'd get sick after walking in the rain. The scene jumps back a few hours earlier, straight to the Duke's residence. This is what actually went down. Blair had informed her brother that Princess Charlotte caught a cold and had to cancel their tea party. The moment Rhinus heard that Charlotte told Blair about her condition but not him, something tugged at his chest. He was her fiancé, yet he found out secondhand. That stung. At first, Rhinus refused to visit. He said showing up without notice would be rude, especially when it came to a lady. Blair was not impressed. She scolded him for being completely clueless about women and went on a full explanation mode. When a woman becomes physically weak, she also becomes emotionally vulnerable. In short, Charlotte would naturally want the person she loved to come see her. Blair then suggested he bring flowers and visit anyway. She even added a very questionable tip she claimed came from noble ladies at the academy, saying that if someone passes a cold to another person, the sick one recovers faster. Her solution was simple. Go there and catch the cold yourself. Rhinus didn't argue. He just said he would check his schedule with Alfred first. That part was true. He really did have an overwhelming amount of work piled up that day. On top of that, he was afraid Charlotte might misunderstand his intentions. The last thing he wanted was for her to think he had feelings for her. Which was ironic, because despite rejecting Blair's advice out loud, he somehow ended up rushing to Charlotte's palace with a bouquet in hand. In his mind, it wasn't improper since she was already his fiancé. That was the excuse he settled on. He even tried to follow Blair and Alfred's strange advice about sharing the cold, only to be stopped cold by Martina's perfectly timed interruption. Now, after all of that, Rhinus stood outside Charlotte's door, his face burning as he silently scolded himself for acting completely unhinged. He barely had time to calm down before his thoughts were cut off by Jonathan greeting him. As soon as Rhinus laid eyes on Jonathan, something clicked. This was the same guard who had held Charlotte during the debutante ball. In truth, Rhinus had seen Jonathan several times back at the military academy. For a commoner, the man had remarkable talent. Putting everything together, Rhinus finally understood what Charlotte meant earlier when she mentioned that he wouldn't mind another man entering her bedroom. When Rhinus asked what Jonathan was doing there, Jonathan replied that as Charlotte's personal guard, he entered her chambers more often than the Duke himself. With no real argument to use, Rhinus coldly told Jonathan that he should work himself to the bone to keep his fiancée safe. Then, without another word, the Duke walked away. The misunderstanding quietly settled in, while his jealousy absolutely did not. Back in the present, Jonathan hands Charlotte the results of his investigation into the third victim. Inside the stack are an account book and a report tracing the bakery owner's movements before her death. The woman had a favorable reputation in Norwood. She often gave away free bread to the slums, and on the day she was killed, she was heading out for volunteer work like she always did. Nothing about her routine suggested trouble, which made the case feel even heavier. Charlotte comments that gathering all of this must not have been easy, and asks how he managed it. Jonathan just flashes a grin and calls it a trade secret. She lets it go and thanks him instead, saying she'll go through the details once she feels better. Right after that, her body betrays her with another fit of sneezing and coughing. A short walk in the rain had already knocked her flat, and now she was still pushing herself with murder cases. Jonathan scolds her for it, sounding more worried than strict. Charlotte laughs it off, saying Martina has already filled the nagging quota for the day, so she didn't need him joining in too. When Charlotte tries to hand the documents back, her grip slips and the papers scatter. Jonathan reacts fast, picking everything up, stacking them neatly and tying them together. Her gaze locks onto the knot holding the bundle together, and her face turns pale in an instant. The change was so sharp that it was impossible to miss. Before the story settles back into the present, it takes a step into Jonathan Watson's past. Being talented was never a blessing for a man born in the Norwood slums. It only made the gap between him and the nobles more painful. No matter how well he performed, the good chances always went to people with titles, not skill. A few commoners were allowed into the military academy, but they were treated like dirt from day one. Jonathan endured it anyway, because in the end, becoming the lowest-ranking officer in the Imperial Army was still better than having no future at all. For someone like him, that was considered making it. That hope didn't last long. Once inside the army, all he saw was rot. Vassal states were abused in the name of the Empire. Orders crossed every moral line, and the noble families in charge pretended not to see a thing. When Jonathan spoke up, the system crushed him fast. He was arrested on a made-up charge of assaulting a superior officer. The nobles who gave the orders walked free, and the commoner who objected was labeled a criminal. His life was headed straight for disgrace and exile. That was when Princess Charlotte appeared. She was famous for all the wrong reasons. People called her foolish, obsessed with Archduke Killian, and unstable enough to rip your hair out if you looked at her the wrong way. When she met Jonathan, she offered to buy his loyalty outright. It sounded ridiculous, and he was sure she had an agenda. Still, she was the first noble to say what happened to him was unfair. That alone was shocking. Jonathan decided to accept, planning to play along for as long as it benefited him. Things didn't go the way he expected. The princess turned out to be sharp, kind, and surprisingly endearing. She wasn't obsessed with the Archduke at all. Instead, her attention was fixed on Duke Adler. To Jonathan, the Duke existed on a level ordinary people could only admire from afar. He assumed the Duke had rejected her, just like the rumors claimed the Archduke once had. That would explain the lonely look she wore while wandering the Morstan Gardens during the debutante ball. Jonathan knew that feeling well. He couldn't do much for her, but he believed she didn't deserve to be hurt by men too cold to value her. The memory fades, and the story snaps back to the present. Seeing the terror on Charlotte's face, Jonathan steps in at once. He cups her face gently, asking what's wrong. When she whispers that it's the knot, his eyes drop to the documents. He explains it's a Cortinan knot, rarely used in the Empire except by the military. It's strong, practical, and something Academy trainees learn early on. For people like him, tying it becomes second nature. When Charlotte admits that the knot frightened her, the truth finally comes out. It's the same knot used by the serial killer on every victim. That's when it hits Jonathan. She once suspected him. He points out how strange that was, considering he's been working beside her day and night. Charlotte grows flustered and says the suspicion was brief. She scolds herself in silence for forgetting one key fact. During the first murder, Jonathan was stationed in Cortina with the army. He couldn't have been the killer even if he wanted to be. Jonathan adds that judging someone by a knot alone makes no sense. By that logic, every Academy graduate would be suspicious. Even Duke Adler once used the same knot to tie his umbrella. The pieces quickly fell into place in his mind. Jonathan realized that the person Charlotte had truly been watching all along was Duke Adler, and he asked her to confirm it. When she did, he stared at her in disbelief. He then asked if that was the reason she accepted the engagement and whether she had noticed anything unusual about the Duke. Charlotte couldn't explain everything. She avoided mentioning the novel's intro she had read and instead listed what she could. Rhinus fit the profile too well. He was a man around 180 centimeters tall, trained by the military, and connected to several of the victims. She said she couldn't marry him until she was certain he was not a murderer. Jonathan could only sigh. In the entire Empire, she might be the only person capable of suspecting Duke Adler of serial murder. Charlotte admitted that was exactly why she had kept quiet until now. She reminded Jonathan of their contract and asked him to continue helping her as he had been. Then, at last, she told him the truth. She trusts him. When he asked why, her answer was simple. She smiled at him and said he wouldn't let her walk in the rain. If only she knew what that stiff, sharp-tongued and tsundere Duke had already done for her as well. Maybe then she wouldn't be suspecting him anymore. Naturally, Jonathan asked whether she was truly in love with the Duke. Charlotte did not answer with words. Instead, she broke into another round of aggressive coughing, the kind that made it impossible to pretend she was fine. Jonathan sighed and handed her a glass of water. After she finally caught her breath, she admitted in a small voice that she was not. One could say Jonathan felt like he had just gained a tiny advantage. Before leaving, he promised to do everything in his power to help her uncover the real culprit before the wedding, even if it meant pushing himself past his limits. He smiled in a way that felt unusually genuine, and Charlotte thought that at least some of her stress had lifted. Between that and the medicine, she felt like she might actually recover soon. Several days pass, and with her health finally restored, Charlotte turns her full attention to the third victim, a humble bakery owner known for selling incredibly delicious bread beloved by ordinary citizens. The baker had a reputation for being kind-hearted, often volunteering in the slums and helping those in need. But no matter how deeply Charlotte investigates, she finds no direct connection between the victim and Rhinus at all. That alone is strange enough. Most of the bakery's customers were commoners, along with schools and local restaurants that had absolutely nothing to do with the nobility. Even so, the shop had earned a shocking amount of profit. And that is where things stopped making sense. The bakery's income was unbelievably high, yet its expenses were unusually low. The numbers simply do not add up. Charlotte narrows her eyes at the endless transaction records spread across her desk, certain she has overlooked an important detail somewhere in the mess. With this much money involved, there has to be a hidden clue buried in the documents. Just then, Martina enters the room, unintentionally pulling the princess out of her thoughts. She delivers a letter from Rhinus regarding their next date, and this time, he is allowing Charlotte to choose the location herself. Perfect. For Charlotte, this is not just a simple date, but a perfect chance to investigate further. Martina eagerly suggests several elegant summer activities, perhaps a relaxing boat ride, or maybe attending a grand theater performance. But Charlotte shocks her by saying she wants to try something entirely different. She wants to experience life as a commoner. The maid can only stare in surprise. Before Martina can even recover, Charlotte casually adds that she will also need to borrow some of her clothes for the outing. Now that truly leaves the maid speechless. The long-awaited day arrives quickly. Practically glowing with excitement, Charlotte asks if they can stroll through Baker Street together. Judging by the Duke's expression alone, the idea clearly sounds far from appealing to him. He does not believe Baker Street has anything particularly interesting to offer, and asks what exactly she hopes to do there. Of course, Charlotte already knows the district is packed with small businesses and busy shops. That is precisely why she chose it. But instead of revealing her real reason, she simply claims that some friends recommended the area to her. That answer catches the Duke completely off guard. He admits he never realized his fiancé had commoners as friends. Charlotte immediately scrambles to defend herself, quickly bringing up Martina as an example. Honestly, she did not expect Rhinus to catch on to her lie so quickly. In reality, she does not really have any friends at all. Accepting that a maid could indeed be considered a princess's friend, Rhinus then asks if the same applies to her commoner bodyguard as well. He adds that while visiting Baker Street with attendants would be perfectly normal, he does not think it is wise for just the two of them to wander there alone. But Charlotte refuses to give up. She pleads with him, insisting that she truly wants this outing to be only between the two of them. Cornered with no better option, the Duke reluctantly agrees, and immediately earns dramatic praise from Charlotte, who enthusiastically compliments his kind and charitable heart, as though he had just saved an entire nation, instead of agreeing to a simple date. Rhinus plans to have his secretary reserve a table at a restaurant beforehand, but Charlotte quickly stops him. She insists she wants the complete experience of wandering around freely like ordinary people do. That only leaves the Duke more confused. What exactly does the full commoner experience even mean? Then Charlotte casually drops the real reason. She just wants to spend time alone with her fiancé. Bullseye. The Duke instantly turns red, looking like his soul just left his body while he struggles and fails to act normal. Before they head to Baker Street, Charlotte makes an unexpected stop at a small shop. At this point, all that is left is convincing the Duke to go along with her plan. The moment the shopkeeper notices Rhinus, he hesitates, and politely warns them that they may have entered the wrong store. After all, a nobleman of his status hardly looks like someone who would shop there. But Charlotte immediately shakes her head. They are exactly where they need to be. She explains that they are looking for men's clothing that will not attract too much attention. The Duke still looks unconvinced, questioning whether such a thing is really necessary. But Charlotte bluntly tells him the truth. His current appearance is far too eye-catching. Someone dressed like him would stand out instantly on Baker Street. In short, he is simply too dazzling for the role. Hearing that, the shopkeeper hurriedly begins searching for something more modest. To Rhinus, the entire situation feels oddly unfamiliar. It is his first time ever wearing ready-made clothing instead of custom-tailored outfits. Surprisingly, that detail excites Charlotte even more, and she eagerly pushes him toward the fitting room. The shopkeeper assists the Duke while Charlotte waits outside. As she listens from a distance, she can hear the man repeatedly gasping in admiration over Rhinus's physique. His broad muscles, solid chest, and flawless skin that naturally captures attention without any effort at all. Right then, Charlotte has a realization. That face plus that body combo? Yeah, Mr. Handsome Man might be the Empire's most lethal distraction. Then the Duke finally steps out. Even dressed in much simpler clothes than usual, he still looks absurdly handsome. Somehow the casual outfit only makes him more attractive instead of less. Rhinus frowns slightly and asks whether ready-made clothes are always this uncomfortable. The shopkeeper quickly explains that the shop designs its clothing to imitate the appearance of expensive custom suits while remaining affordable. But Rhinus barely cares about the explanation. The only thing he wants to know is Charlotte's opinion. Still caught off guard by how good he looks, she awkwardly stammers that the outfit suits him perfectly. Rhinus asks if she really thinks so. Charlotte, with zero mental filter, casually admits he is completely her type in that outfit. She gets way too excited, hyping him up like a professional fan, then asks if this outfit was secretly designed for her preferences. What Charlotte really wants to say, however, is that it feels dangerously close to love at first sight. Normally, she throws around dramatic lines like that without hesitation, yet for some reason, this time the words refuse to come out properly. Then, shopkeeper suddenly interrupts them. He awkwardly asks whether they would like to purchase the clothes since they seem to like them so much. Rhinus responds in the most absurd way possible. Instead of buying only the outfit he is wearing, he purchases every single item in the store. To him, it barely matters financially anyway. None of the clothes there cost even a fraction of the custom suits he normally wears. Charlotte instantly recognizes the move as the classic spoiling your partner while shopping cliché, straight out of a romance story. In reality, the Duke is so happy from her praise that he just goes, "Buy everything." At least now he is finally ready for Baker Street. The pair wander through a part of the city where nobles rarely set foot unless absolutely necessary, naturally attracting curious looks from nearby pedestrians. Even in simple clothing, Rhinus still radiates the kind of noble aura that refuses to stay hidden. Seriously, the man could wear a potato sack and still look intimidatingly expensive. As they continue down the busy street, the Duke asks if Charlotte already knows where she wants to go. So she points toward a nearby restaurant. Of course, this is not just a casual lunch date. According to the transaction records she investigated earlier, the restaurant had been one of the bakery's biggest clients for years, regularly purchasing bread and desserts from the deceased shop owner. To Charlotte, this outing is secretly part investigation, part romantic adventure. Poor guy has absolutely no idea he has been dragged into detective work. Once seated, Charlotte quickly orders a well-done steak, carefully remembering the Duke's little issue with food, along with a basket of bread and a chocolate dessert. The moment she leaves, Rhinus remarks that even during harsh military training, he had eaten better meals and sat in more comfortable places than this. Charlotte cannot help laughing at his brutally honest comment. She asks whether experiencing something different like this is not enjoyable in its own way. Not even slightly, especially because he still has no clue why they are actually there. Leaning closer, Charlotte lowers her voice and whispers that this will remain a secret shared only between the two of them. She casually admits that she has snuck into places like this many times before, even bringing up the incident where she was discovered drunk in Norwood, once again proving why people call her the Empire's delinquent princess. But strangely, Rhinus barely reacts to the drunken story at all. The only thing his mind focuses on is the fact that they now share a secret together. Not long after, the food arrives at their table. Charlotte immediately notices something strange the moment she tastes the bread. The flavor is different. When she mentions it, the waitress explains with a saddened expression that the restaurant changed suppliers a while ago. The small bakery that used to provide their bread closed after its owner tragically died in an accident. According to her, the baker had been an exceptionally kind person. Hearing that immediately makes Charlotte uneasy. She then samples the chocolate dessert and quickly complains that it tastes far sweeter than the old bakery's products ever did. The waitress nods in agreement. She explains that while the new bakery makes sweeter bread overall, the previous bakery's desserts had possessed a completely different kind of sweetness. Something oddly addictive that kept customers coming back again and again, almost like they had fallen under a spell. She also mentions that the bakery's famous vanilla cream had been especially unforgettable because of its incredible flavor. Rhinus notices how unusually invested Charlotte seems in the conversation and asks whether she had visited the bakery before. Momentarily startled, Charlotte quickly improvises an excuse. She claims Martina once told her how amazing the bakery's bread was. Besides, she adds, things like famous bakeries are not exactly topics the Duke would pay attention to anyway. Rhinus calmly answers that Charlotte does not need to force herself to care about his interests either. But Charlotte immediately rejects that idea. Of course she should care. If she is going to oversee his household someday, then learning about food, ingredients, and quality products would naturally be part of her responsibilities. The words hit Rhinus like a surprise attack. For a split second, he vividly imagines Charlotte managing his estate as the lady of his household. The image shakes him far more deeply than he expected. Meanwhile, Charlotte internally panics the moment she realizes what she just said. Why did those words come out so naturally? As far as she knows, she will not even live long enough to see that future. Pushing aside the strange feeling in her chest, she asks about the current state of his household instead. Rhinus explains that his stepmother is presently in charge, though they will most likely have to speak with her soon. Charlotte smoothly returns the discussion to the restaurant, commenting that the food exceeded her expectations. Still, she quietly adds that it is unfortunate the bakery owner died in such an accident. Seeing how invested Charlotte is in the bakery's story, Rhinus casually suggests that they could investigate the matter later if she is truly that curious. The moment he says that, Charlotte quietly realizes how he genuinely knows nothing about the case. Noticing that the Duke still has not touched his meal, she tilts her head and asks whether he is not hungry. Rhinus replies that he is fine, but Charlotte clearly has no intention of letting him escape that easily. Insisting that the dessert tastes amazing, she cuts off a small piece of cake with her fork and suddenly holds it out toward him. The unexpected gesture instantly throws Rhinus into panic. He stares at her in complete confusion, clearly having no idea how to respond to this situation. Charlotte then has to explain, almost like she is teaching a child, that he is supposed to open his mouth and say, "Ah." Unfortunately, that only makes the Duke even more mortified. Doing something so embarrassing in public is apparently far beyond his level of mental preparation. So Charlotte, very casually, mentions that this is the kind of thing couples do on dates. Before Rhinus can even process those words properly, she stuffs the cake straight into his mouth. After successfully attacking the Duke with dessert, Charlotte eagerly asks how it tastes. Rhinus swallows slowly before admitting that it is extremely sweet. Charlotte happily agrees while continuing to eat from the same fork herself. And somehow, witnessing that tiny detail only causes the Duke's face to grow even redder. The man is losing battles he does not even realize he is fighting. But while Charlotte appears carefree on the surface, she is actually carrying out one of her favorite interrogation techniques. Her method works by subtly mixing correct information with intentionally incorrect assumptions during casual conversation. Normally, when people feel directly questioned, they instinctively become cautious and defensive. But humans also possess a natural urge to correct misinformation. So when false details are casually inserted into a discussion, people often fix the mistakes without realizing they are revealing valuable information at the same time. And that is exactly what Charlotte has been doing all along. While studying the bakery's transaction records earlier, something had bothered her deeply. Despite earning massive profits, the bakery showed almost no purchases of sugar or spices, ingredients that are absolutely essential for making bread and desserts. The numbers simply did not make sense, especially when the bakery's products were supposedly famous for their sweetness. That contradiction is precisely why Charlotte intentionally asked the waitress whether the bakery made bread without sugar, despite the woman earlier describing the desserts, particularly the vanilla cream, as unusually sweet and addictive. The information clashes too much to ignore. Unfortunately, none of these suspicious details seem remotely interesting to Rhinus. At the moment, the Duke is still far too busy recovering from the emotional damage caused by being unexpectedly fed cake in public. Even after Charlotte intentionally mixes false details into the conversation, changing both the victim's gender and even the cause of death, Renius shows absolutely no reaction whatsoever. Because of that, Charlotte cannot help wondering which possibility is worse. Is he skilled enough to hide what he knows? Or does he genuinely know nothing at all? Before she can think any further, Rhinus suddenly interrupts her thoughts by asking if she plans to compliment his appearance again. Charlotte answers immediately. Of course he looks handsome. Honestly, the response comes out far too naturally. The princess then casually comments that sweets do not really seem to match his tastes, and the Duke agrees. Charlotte mentions that she personally loves sweet food, and then asks whether sugar is expensive within the empire. Rhinus confirms that it is incredibly valuable. According to him, sugar is treated almost like a precious mineral resource. Control over it is passed down through monopolies connected first to the royal family, and then to influential noble houses. At present, those rights belong to the household of Marquise d'Ost, the very same family connected to the Empress herself. That detail instantly catches Charlotte's attention, because the Marquise's secretary had been the fourth victim in the serial murder case. A strange feeling creeps into her mind. Could all of these victims somehow be connected after all? Soon, the pair arrive at another establishment nearby. Curious, Rhinus asks what kind of place it is. Charlotte casually explains that she heard a newly opened bar replaced the bakery that once stood there. She confidently takes a seat and immediately orders 2 glasses of whiskey with ice. Before she can even take a sip, Rhinus quickly stops her, reminding her that drinking heavily in broad daylight is probably a terrible idea. Charlotte waves the concern away. This time, she promises, she definitely will not end up in prison. Then, lifting her glass dramatically, she proposes a toast to his captivating eyes. He seriously needs military-grade defense against her flirting, or he's going to fall head over heels at this rate. As they drink, Charlotte smoothly begins chatting with the bartender and naturally steers the conversation toward the old bakery. Using the opportunity, she mentions hearing that the former owner supposedly had no family. The bartender nods and explains that the woman was not originally from the area. In fact, nobody really knew where she came from before opening the bakery. But everyone remembered her as an exceptionally kind person. While listening carefully, Charlotte suddenly glances to the side and realizes Rhinus has already finished his entire drink. When another glass is offered, however, he quietly refuses, admitting that he already feels dizzy. So he has the alcohol tolerance of a kitten that's 1 sip away from a nap. Nearby, a loud card game catches Charlotte's attention. The atmosphere around the table feels tense and unpleasant. Noticing her gaze, the bartender quickly advises them not to get involved. He explains that the men playing are loan sharks. They target desperate debtors by offering gambling games that supposedly reduce debt, only to trap victims in even worse situations afterward. The moment Charlotte hears that explanation, she instantly recognizes the scheme. In her previous life, she dealt with plenty of illegal gambling operations exactly like this one. Unfortunately, one of the men notices her staring. His expression immediately darkens as he aggressively calls her out, demanding to know why she keeps looking at him. He loudly accuses her of being rude. The bartender quickly jumps in, desperately trying to calm things down by insisting it was just a misunderstanding. But the thug is already worked up. He angrily shouts that she must have lost her mind and sneers that, judging by her clothes, she really does look like nothing more than a commoner. Charlotte calmly watches him approach. For a brief moment, she actually considers simply taking the punch and dealing with the aftermath later. Though considering how fragile her current body is, the pain would probably be much worse than she would like. Thankfully, the thug's fist never reaches Charlotte. Rhinus quickly catches his arm midair and squeezes hard enough to make the thug lose strength. The man's face twists in pain as the Duke stares at him with icy eyes. He coldly warns him, "Lay another filthy hand on her, and you'll regret it." The temperature in the room seems to drop instantly, but the thugs are too stupid to back down. Another man immediately rushes forward and grabs Rhinus from behind, clearly planning to gang up on him. Unfortunately for them, picking a fight with the Duke is a terrible life decision. The entire tavern explodes into chaos. More punches come flying toward him from every direction, but Rhinus dodges them one after another with ease. He moves like someone who has done this countless times before. The customers stare in shock. Charlotte finally understands. Those military accomplishments rumors were not exaggerations. The man is genuinely monstrous in combat. Still, she quickly realizes this situation is only getting worse. If nobody stops the fight soon, the tavern might end up destroyed. Seeing the disaster unfold, the bartender desperately jumps between both sides and begs everyone to settle the matter honorably, like gentlemen. His solution? A traditional card duel. Considering the group, the situation somehow upgraded from fight to financial crime night. The cards already on the table show that the game has been going on for quite some time, and one of the loan sharks confidently displays his hand. Charlotte immediately grows worried, hoping her fiancé will refuse. Not only did he just drink whiskey like water, and when the loan shark asks whether he even knows how to play cards, the Duke calmly accepts. She nearly faints on the spot. At the academy, card games had apparently been strictly forbidden, which explains why the idiot somehow already managed to lose his watch earlier. At this rate, Charlotte is convinced he's going to lose everything, except his underwear. The next round begins, and the cards quickly form a dangerous sequence. Judging from the situation, the Duke is alarmingly close to losing even his pants. Unexpectedly, Rhinus turns toward Charlotte and asks whether she has anything valuable to contribute. She stares at him in utter disbelief. Does this man seriously intend to continue after nearly losing everything? That is when she notices another man nearby, one of the debtors previously scammed by the loan shark. Shaking his head bitterly, the man mutters that he cannot believe he got involved with such pathetic low-level criminals. Right then, Charlotte makes her move and tells Rhinus to step aside. Announcing that the team is changing players, she takes his seat at the table herself. The room instantly erupts with laughter. One of the men sneers mockingly, "Now the tough guy's little girlfriend wants to play?" He then asks whether she even has anything valuable worth betting. Without the slightest hesitation, Charlotte removes an elegant brooch and places it onto the table. The game begins, and soon the loan sharks experience true defeat. Charlotte reveals a full house, successfully winning back the Duke's pocket watch. Unable to hide his curiosity, he asks how she managed to do that. Charlotte proudly claims it comes from proper noble education and refined upbringing. In reality, however, it is a skill she learned from a criminal she once arrested in her previous life for operating an illegal gambling house. During multiple undercover investigations, she had learned enough to avoid suspicion and eventually helped arrest more than 20 people connected to the operation. In other words, these idiots accidentally challenged a professional. The entire tavern stares at her in disbelief. Then Charlotte pushes all of her winnings toward the center of the table. Let's go all in. The loan shark laughs mockingly at her boldness. He admits her courage is impressive, but questions whether she can truly handle the consequences if she loses. Charlotte simply smiles. "If the stakes scare you, we can stop right here." The taunt instantly irritates him. However, before the next round begins, Charlotte demands that they sign a formal contract first. The man agrees on one condition. If she wins, all debts will be erased. But if she loses, the consequences will be ugly, and she may even have to sell her own body to repay everything. Then the final game begins. This time, the loan shark confidently reveals an incredible hand, a straight flush. Smirking proudly, he warns Charlotte not to act so arrogantly. But Charlotte is only getting started. When her turn comes, she slowly reveals her cards one by one, leaving everyone at the table speechless, especially the Duke. She holds a royal straight flush. As the defeated loan sharks look on in horror, Charlotte lifts the contract with a smile. Perhaps it was you who got a little too confident. In the end, the man who had been cornered by the loan sharks bows his head over and over, thanking Charlotte for saving his life. Charlotte gently warns him never to get involved with loan sharks again before handing over the contract, revealing that every single one of his debts has already been paid off. But instead of celebrating, the man lowers his head in shame and explains that he never wanted any of this in the first place. He had only borrowed the money because his son was gravely ill, and he simply ran out of options. No parent could stand by calmly while their child suffers. Charlotte knew that pain all too well because her own father had once carried the same helpless look in his eyes. Charlotte removes the brooch from her chest, telling him to sell it if he ever needs money for medicine. After all, paying off someone's debt does not magically fix their life overnight. The man's eyes quickly fill with tears. To him, this kindness feels almost unbelievable. His voice trembles as he repeatedly thanks her before asking for the name of the person who saved him, swearing he will repay her someday no matter what. But Charlotte simply smiles and tells him not to worry about that. Taking care of his family is already more than enough repayment for her. After finally saying goodbye to the man, the two are left alone once again. The Duke asks if she is always this generous. First Blair, and now even a complete stranger she had no reason to help. More importantly, did she realize she gained absolutely nothing from doing all this? But for Charlotte, there was never any calculation behind her actions in the first place. Whenever she sees something unfair happening right in front of her, her body just moves on its own before her brain can even catch up. Charlotte awkwardly apologizes for dragging him into such a messy situation and asks if the whole ordeal made him uncomfortable, quickly assuring him it would not happen again. To her surprise, Rhinus admits he actually enjoyed watching everything unfold because of her. Especially the part where she handled the cards so quickly and smoothly that even his eyes could barely keep up. It honestly looked like magic. Hearing that instantly lifts the weight off Charlotte's shoulders. Deep down, she had been terrified he might say he never wanted to see her again until the wedding day. Trying to explain herself, Charlotte awkwardly admits that her hands simply move faster than most people can follow. Their conversation comes to an abrupt stop when he suddenly notices something behind them. so the Duke swiftly pulls her into his arms. Caught completely off guard, she stares up at him in confusion and asks what happened. In a low voice, Rhinus tells her that someone might be following them. Charlotte immediately assumes it could be one of the tavern thugs from earlier, but the Duke's expression remains serious. Honestly, he almost wishes it were just those idiots. Because if the person trailing them actually knows who they are, then this situation could turn far more dangerous. As he says that, Rhinus pulls a gun from inside his vest, muttering that he would prefer to avoid bloodshed if possible. Hold on, when did he even get that thing? The Duke casually asks if she really thought he would walk through a dangerous district completely unarmed beside her. Fair point. Keeping Charlotte close against him, Rhinus continues moving forward while the mysterious figure steadily follows after them. He cautiously looks behind him one more time, and whatever he sees instantly sends both of them sprinting for their lives. Rhinus tightly grips Charlotte's hand while searching for somewhere safe to hide, all while keeping his weapon ready at any moment. Behind them, the unknown man continues chasing them with a dagger in hand. Things officially went from romantic outing to life-threatening side quest in record time. Soon, Rhinus spots a narrow alley and quickly pulls Charlotte inside before the pursuer can catch sight of them. Hidden within the shadows, the Duke wraps an arm around Charlotte protectively, shielding her completely within his embrace. Pressed tightly against his chest, Charlotte can clearly hear the rapid pounding of his heartbeat. Then they hear the pursuer mutter to himself, "It will be the end of me if I fail this mission." Charlotte whispers, asking if it really is that person, but Rhinus immediately hushes her because the man is getting closer. Sure enough, slow footsteps begin approaching their hiding place. The pursuer turns directly toward the alley, but Rhinus reacts first. In a single swift motion, the Duke strikes the man with his weapon, knocking him unconscious before he can even react. The man collapses onto the ground instantly. Afterward, Rhinus asks Charlotte if she recognizes the pursuer's face from anywhere. But before she can answer, another set of footsteps suddenly echoes nearby, meaning there could be more people after them. The tension shoots right back up again. Rhinus mutters that he may have no choice but to use his weapon properly this time, while Charlotte hurriedly searches around for anything she can use to defend herself too. Eventually, she grabs a wooden club despite having absolutely no idea if she will even get the chance to use it. The fact that she looked ready to charge into battle with a random wooden stick was both concerning and strangely adorable. As the footsteps grow closer, both of them tense up. Someone finally appears. Rhinus instantly raises his weapon toward the newcomer, only for the man to immediately recognize him. Turns out it is Alfred. Rhinus lets out a quiet sigh of relief before reminding Alfred that he specifically told him to follow from a distance. Alfred explains that he became worried after suddenly losing sight of his master inside the alleyways. The Duke then explains about the pursuer. Judging from the situation, the unconscious man is probably not an assassin, but they still plan to drag him in for questioning later. Now that the immediate danger has passed, Charlotte finally asks about Alfred secretly tailing them this entire time. Rhinus confirms it, before pointing out that his fiancé still does not fully understand the dangers that come with being royalty. Charlotte admits that she truly did not think things through properly. The Duke then gently tries to lighten the mood, saying that despite everything, it was still fun. He even admits it would have been more entertaining if he had seen her swinging the wooden club. As he says that, he gives her a soft smile. Charlotte can only stare back at him with sparkling eyes. After the less than helpful investigation on Baker Street, Charlotte finds herself completely buried in preparations for the upcoming Imperial Federation banquet. The amount of studying involved is brutal. She has to memorize the history of every participating nation, learn information about each delegation, and somehow keep all of it organized inside her head without collapsing first. Thankfully, Charlotte does have one special advantage. As someone who once survived endless exam seasons in her previous life, she already knows the painful art of cramming information into her brain while running purely on determination and suffering. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out to her. Waiting outside is none other than Watson. Charlotte immediately looks surprised and asks if he has seriously been standing outside this whole time in the heat. More importantly, was he not exhausted? Jonathan explains that there are plenty of shaded areas nearby before smiling, and saying that waiting for her is not difficult at all. Trying to regain her composure, Charlotte shares what she considers good news, Because of heightened security during the Imperial Federation banquet, personal attendants will not be allowed inside the venue. That means Jonathan can finally take the day off and get some proper rest for once. Unfortunately, Jonathan reacts as if she just announced the end of the world. Instead of looking relieved, he immediately asks who will be protecting her during the banquet. Charlotte explains that the Imperial Palace itself will be in charge of security, so there is nothing to worry about. But Jonathan's expression still does not improve. He then asks whether her partner for the banquet will be the Duke. Charlotte confirms it, though she can't help finding the question a little strange. At that point, Jonathan directly asks if she is being far too careless. Clearly bothered, he reminds her about the pursuer from Baker Street and questions whether she truly understands who might be behind all these incidents. But no matter how concerned he is, Charlotte knows there is nothing she can do about it. She cannot bring Jonathan into the banquet with her, and she cannot suddenly avoid the Duke either. Jonathan then asks why she insists on putting herself in danger just to gather evidence. That question leaves Charlotte silent for a moment. Because the truth is something she cannot explain to anyone. How could she possibly tell him that she herself is destined to become the 8th victim? No matter how far she runs from the main suspect, if she fails to uncover the real criminal, her fate will never change. Letting out a quiet sigh, Charlotte explains that she cannot suddenly distance herself from her fiancé without any proper reason. Especially when that fiancé happens to be Duke Adler himself. The moment she says that, Jonathan quietly turns his face away. Thankfully, before the silence can completely suffocate everyone involved, Martina suddenly appears out of nowhere and insists they all head inside together. At last, the day of the Imperial Federation banquet finally arrives. The entire palace is thrown into complete chaos as servants rush everywhere at top speed, desperately trying to keep everything organized before the guests arrive. In the middle of it all stands Charlotte, looking absolutely breathtaking in her dress. Martina is practically glowing with excitement while admiring the princess from head to toe. She proudly declares that she knew the dress would suit Charlotte perfectly and cannot stop celebrating the fact that they managed to prepare something so beautiful for her. Especially because Charlotte has not attended a royal banquet in a very long time. There's a reason for that. Charlotte's last appearance at an official royal event ended so disastrously that she was literally thrown out because of her behavior. Trying to shift away from that embarrassing memory, Charlotte asks about the Duke. Martina assumes he is simply busy getting ready himself, though she confidently assures Charlotte that he will absolutely come to escort her personally. And true to his word, Rhinus appears. For a brief second, the man genuinely looks less like a duke and more like some divine being descending from the heavens. At this point, he might as well have had holy light shining behind him. Charlotte is internally losing composure while externally trying to act normal. All she manages to say out loud is that he looks magnificent. Thankfully, Rhinus does not leave her flustered alone for long. The Duke compliments her in return, telling Charlotte that she looks beautiful and that the dress suits her perfectly. Charlotte quickly thanks him for choosing such an incredible outfit for her, making it clear that she already knows he was the one who paid extra to have the dress specially prepared. Still, she shyly admits that no matter how she looks at it, the gown feels far too extravagant for her. But Renius genuinely seems confused by what she means. Realizing how that sounded, Charlotte hurriedly clarifies that she is not complaining at all and only wanted to express her gratitude. In response, the Duke tells her that her thanks should really go to the person who created the dress instead. That simple answer brings a soft smile to Charlotte's face. Noticing the unusual commotion around the palace, Rhinus asks if something happened. Charlotte explains that the servants and staff have simply been overwhelmed preparing for the Imperial Federation banquet. With nobles and delegates arriving from every direction, the entire palace has been running in full panic mode since morning. Using that opening, Rhinus suddenly brings up the incident on Baker Street. The Duke reveals that the man who had been following them was actually one of Prince Frederick's subordinates. He coldly remarks that the spy was both incompetent and overly bold before explaining that the man confessed everything during interrogation, including the fact that Frederick personally ordered the surveillance. Hearing that immediately sends alarm bells ringing in Charlotte's head. But what troubles her the most is the reason behind the spying. Was Frederick merely trying to gather information on her? Considering how openly hostile he acted during their previous encounter, she would not be surprised if he was searching for weaknesses he could later use against her politically. Apparently, during questioning, The pursuer repeatedly insisted that he never intended to harm either of them. Charlotte finds that believable. Even though the man carried a dagger, he never once attempted to attack them during the chase. If he truly intended violence, he had multiple opportunities to strike, but never did. More importantly, harming a member of the royal family is not something someone does recklessly. The punishment alone would be severe enough to ruin entire bloodlines, meaning he would have needed certainty before making any move. Rhinus agrees with her conclusion, and confirms that the spy admitted Prince Frederick only wanted useful information. With both the confession and witnesses available, Charlotte has every right to bring the matter before the court. The Duke explains the situation with complete composure, saying it would actually work in her favor politically. Since evidence and witnesses exist, she would hold a strong position, and he assures her she would have nothing to fear from Frederick afterward. However, Charlotte knows that royals spying on one another is hardly unusual. Since no actual harm was done, she believes exposing the matter publicly would do little damage to her brother. Instead, it would only worsen her already poor reputation among the nobility. Not to mention, she herself had also been disguised as a commoner on Baker Street, so she decides not to pursue the matter any further. Besides, the last thing she wants is unnecessary drama right before the banquet. Rhinus respects her decision, but he advises her to remain cautious around Frederick and his associates for the time being. Hearing genuine concern from the man she suspects might someday kill her is a little emotionally confusing. The imperial banquet proceeds smoothly at first. Nobles laugh together, glasses clink across the hall, and the guests enjoy themselves without the slightest clue about the tension surrounding the royal family behind the scenes. As Charlotte and Rhinus enter together, the entire hall immediately turns toward them. They look absurdly stunning standing side by side. Everywhere they walk, eyes follow them. The overwhelming attention makes Charlotte slightly nervous, especially with so many nobles openly staring as if tonight's entertainment has finally arrived. Among the crowd, one particular woman immediately catches Charlotte's attention. It's Lady Taylor, one of the Empire's most influential figures, the woman who practically controls enormous portions of imperial commerce, and also the Emperor's sister. Charlotte politely greets her aunt. Taylor comments that during their previous meeting, she hadn't even known where to look at Charlotte. She then adds that her niece's tastes seem much more refined after that unfortunate disaster. That was a very elegant way of roasting her previous fashion choice. Charlotte can only laugh awkwardly and agree. Taylor continues by saying she has heard Charlotte has become quite impressive lately, though the sarcasm hidden beneath her elegant smile is impossible to miss. Taylor bluntly says that the royal family practically owes Charlotte a huge debt of gratitude, before casually bringing up the rumors that Charlotte saved several nobles, including the Emperor himself. Charlotte is left completely confused as her aunt starts listing her achievements one after another, even mentioning the grain overproduction problem and Charlotte's idea to turn the excess crops into alcohol. And then Rhinus joins the conversation, proudly confirming that the solution really was Charlotte's idea. Look at our guy being instant proud future hubby. Taylor then remarks that the proposal benefited her quite a lot as well, since she oversees the Empire's alcohol industry. Nearby nobles immediately begin whispering among themselves. Some even insist Charlotte's recent success must simply be luck. Obviously, certain nobles would rather choke dramatically than admit the princess might actually be competent. Regardless, her aunt invites Charlotte to her next tea party, openly admitting she's already looking forward to seeing her there. It sounds like a simple invitation, but in reality, Lady Taylor's tea parties are political battlefields disguised as polite conversation, where the Empire's most influential women smile while quietly trying to ruin each other's lives. Being invited means Charlotte has officially stepped into high imperial society. More importantly, it means she now has the power to seriously compete in the struggle for succession to the throne. The same nobles who once mocked and humiliated her suddenly swarm around her, showering her with compliments as though they had always supported her from the beginning. Funny how quickly respect appears once power enters the room. Some even notice the princess is wearing a dress from that famous boutique, a total glow-up compared to the humiliation she suffered at the previous debutante ball. Soon, another noble approaches her. The man introduces himself as Derek von Linderman. Charlotte honestly did not expect to receive this much attention throughout the banquet, but thankfully she prepared herself in advance. Remaining perfectly composed, she says she has heard of him before, and even demonstrates her knowledge regarding business affairs within the Principality of Demios. However, Rhinus quickly interrupts the conversation. The Duke informs Derek that the princess must prepare for the royal ceremony and that they need to leave immediately. Derek politely accepts the situation and says he hopes they will have another chance to speak someday, only for Rhinus to coldly respond that such a meeting may never happen. The moment Derek walks away, Charlotte asks if it is not still too early for the next banquet proceedings. But Rhinus firmly insists they must follow the schedule exactly. Charlotte points out that she barely even had the chance to properly speak with Derek, causing the Duke to ask whether there was any particular reason she needed to talk to him in the first place. Even Charlotte finds his reaction strangely intense. She quickly denies having any special interest in Derek, but unfortunately, the damage has already been done. If jealousy had a volume setting, Rhinus somehow managed to crank his all the way to maximum. Bluntly, he says he dislikes people who fail to understand their place and overstep their boundaries. To Charlotte, it almost feels as though Derek touched something the Duke already considered his own. And considering the ongoing conflict between the two men over mining rights, the tension suddenly makes a lot more sense. Just as the atmosphere finally begins calming down again, another voice suddenly calls out to the princess. This time the newcomer is Archduke Killian. The instant the two men lock eyes, the mutual hatred between them becomes painfully obvious to everyone nearby. And now, what kind of fate is waiting for the princess tonight?